listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition and another week of the most disruptive show covering news, politics, and diverse events from across these divided states we call America and the increasingly fragmented, embattled, frankly violent surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan, and normally in the left corner, we would have our indefatigable Jamarl Thomas, progressive co-host of the show. He is, however, still not feeling well. He was tentative on whether or not he'd be coming back in today, although he was planning on doing it remotely, to be clear. Just to give you some sense of where he's at, but he decided to stay out for another day. He will probably be back pretty soon, just to give you a heads up. And that means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. That first part was a bit extra long, but you get the idea. He will be back in soon. Hopefully, he is still not feeling all that up to par, of course, but he's getting better, it seems. Without further ado, let's get into headlines. First up in COVID news. Well, just yesterday, the cases were actually not too bad. About 36,068 new COVID cases reported yesterday, also about 131 new deaths. However, the weekends are usually slower, and on Friday, we can't report Friday's numbers because we go on live early Friday morning. Friday was terrible. Friday was the worst day we've seen since this winter, and I keep saying that kind of thing just because it keeps getting worse. 168,343 new cases, which is not good. I'm sure that we'll be seeing a number a lot closer to that than 36,000 for today's count, just because, when we go into the weekend and the centers shut down and are much slower to report their numbers, and then you sort of get much higher counts for the next couple of days. Usually that's the trend. Anyway, over the past week, we currently have an average of about 110,000 cases per day. That's an increase of 112% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 50% of the total American public has still been fully vaccinated, and 58% of residents have received at least one dose. You can see Biden's problems just in that set of numbers. One, that there's this inexplicable 8% gap that never changes of the people who went in for one shot. And I'm not just talking about Johnson & Johnson. Didn't get two. And then there's just the overall percent of the population that's been fully vaccinated, 50%. That is not budging. That's moved 1 percentage point in the last month, I think, something like that. I update that occasionally whenever it changes, but it hasn't been changing is my point. Anyway, to give people a sense of the total numbers here in the United States, the coronavirus has infected about 35,812,000 people across the U.S., and it's killed 616,590 people about. Starting today, people in France will now have to show a health pass in order to enter bars, cafes, restaurants, and long-distance trains. This extends a current requirement that those attending concerts, cinemas, and museums use the health pass. This has been the subject of some rather substantial recent protests, as have other similar requirements, mandates, passes, passports, and such across other countries in Europe. In July, Emmanuel Macron announced that healthcare workers would have to be vaccinated by September 15th, or they would be banned from work and not paid. That's still a little bit over a month away. Moving to national news, back here in the States, Melissa DeRosa, secretary to Governor Andrew Cuomo, has resigned amid the investigation of sexual assault against Cuomo. In the allegations, DeRosa has been accused of taking part in the retaliation against his accusers, and she has now jumped ship again. In the accusation made by Lindsey Boylan, she was one of the more prominent accusers who came out fairly early on in a widely publicized Medium piece that she wrote and then published. Anyway, in her accusation, DeRosa was said to consistently scream at staff for illogical things, and apparently she was the one who released Boylan's confidential information to the public after Boylan came out with her story. The Senate is reportedly moving closer to passing infrastructure after a vote last night to end debate, and another vote to pass the bill is due to come tomorrow. I hear. Democrats are also reportedly looking to move forward with another package of soft infrastructure or human infrastructure that they're looking to pass using budget reconciliation because they're simply unlikely to get it. Otherwise, Republicans aren't going to go for that. The Minneapolis City Council is revisiting the total disbandment of the police department in an upcoming vote. The officers would be replaced with a quote-unquote comprehensive public health approach and quote-unquote licensed peace officers if necessary. You just change the word police to peace, which is, something that people will already often call them anyway, and that'll solve all your problems. You just change that slight word because words control reality. The movement would also put the new department not directly under the power of the mayor's office. Activist groups have raised more than $1 million total and collected over 20,000 signatures for the move. In international news, heavy clashes have broken out in northern Afghanistan as the Taliban continues its offensive. They've taken 5 provincial capitals from government forces in just the last handful of days. This assault comes ahead of the planned withdrawal by the United States coming up this September 11th. That's just over a month away, although apparently U.S. forces have been making a more or less speedy retreat already, pulling out, flying home, that kind of thing. We're apparently already doing that in a big way. Officials in Mali say that more than 40 civilians and 12 troops were killed by Islamist militias in northern Mali and nearby in Burkina Faso, respectively. Those are the 12 troops that were killed. The president of Burkina Faso said on Twitter that his country continues to, quote, wage without concession the war the obscurantist and barbaric forces have imposed on our country, end quote. Quite wordy. A man was shot dead in Lebanon while arguing at a petrol station, with the fight escalating from using fists to knives to eventually a gun. This is the latest high-profile crime, locally high-profile crime, in a situation of increasing economic desperation. Basically, Lebanon's economy is really, really not doing well. For gosh sakes, the port, it's a port city. The port was destroyed with a massive, and as far as I can tell, it felt unprecedented, even though I'm sure it wasn't technically unprecedented in any way. It's the kind of thing that in recent memory stands out. A warehouse inexplicably exploded. We learned the official message is it was filled with firecrackers and ammonium nitrate that together acted like as an accelerant and a fuel source to create a bomb with the shell of this warehouse, this massive building. Anyway, that basically devastated the port of Beirut. And again, it's a port city, so it hits the center of the town. It destroys the port, it destroys trade, and then buildings shattered, hundreds of people killed, over 200 people killed, countless more injured, thousands injured. And then, it destroys glass. And so if you imagine being in the city center, I wasn't there, but I've heard about it. You imagine being in the city center, and you can see videos of it too. People just blown to their feet, blown across rooms, glass windows completely, blown in, shattered. And if you're inside, you don't want to be standing next to one of those windows. All of this just happened instantaneously, effectively. The fire had been burning for a little while, but when it went off, and it sent seismic waves throughout the city. Anyway, that happened last year, and that city and the country's economy has definitely not recovered from it. Not to mention all of the longstanding problems they had before then with the manager of the central bank and other stuff. In Olympic news, the most challenging Olympic journey, quote unquote, has been officially declared closed by the International Olympic Committee chief yesterday. The final results of the games put Russian athletes at 5th with 71 medals, 20 of those were gold. Great Britain at 4th with 65 medals, 22 were gold. Japan at 3rd with 58 medals, 27 of those were gold. China at 2nd with 88 medals and 38 gold. And number 1, the United States with 113 medals and 39 golds. And you know what that means, baby? That means the United States has both the most gold medals and the most total medals. Number 1 in both categories. Major fist bumps to the sky on the part of the United States here, but everybody put in a good job. It was a very good effort. Good Olympics. Everybody came together. We came out on top, but that's just how it goes sometimes. Okay, I'll put it like this: there aren't many. I don't take too many opportunities to relish in this stuff, and I'm not even a big sports guy, but I'll take this one. In the last day of the games, the U.S. won gold in volleyball, track cycling, and basketball. That pushed them pushed them one gold above China to win in both counts again. In Earth and Science news, in its most definitive report on the subject yet, the United Nations has declared unequivocally that mankind is to blame for the accelerated pace of global warming. They've warned that every region on Earth will become increasingly likely to experience extreme weather disruption. This is a big report, and it's getting coverage. It's not big in the sense that it adds anything technically new or surprises anybody really, but it's big in the sense that it hammers home, hey, this is an ever more, severe way of saying that we really need to deal with this problem, basically. And I'm in agreement with that too. I'll put it like this. I've been looking at property recently, and part of what comes up when you're looking into, okay, I'm trying to figure, it's not because I have the money, I'm just planning out in the long term, where do I want to live, that kind of thing. But part of what comes up if you're looking into property is like, hey, how seriously is the local ecology and the local climate going to change as a result of climate change? And usually the answer is quite a bit. And so you have to sort of do forecasting, which gets into just all this weird territory. My point being, it's impacting where it's going to impact, which is everything about how the way where you live works is going to change, basically, the local ecology, effectively. That's as far as I can tell. Anyway, one last quick headline here. A couple actually paired up. Massive fires in the United States, as well as in the Balkans and Anatolia. In Greece and Turkey, you've had major fires burning for weeks now that have only grown near Athens and on islands in the Aegean Sea there, as well as on mainland Turkey. You also, in California, have the Dixie Fire, which has become the second largest in California history. That blaze has already spread across 4 counties, burning an area larger than New York City. Only 21% of the fire has been labeled as contained, and 4 firefighters have been sent to the hospital so far. With that, those are headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we've got a half-stacked house today. We have one host on, and we have one producer on. And producer Austin, please do come in here. Thank you. I will tie the gap over like this. 21% of the fire has been labeled as contained. Containment, by the way, what this means, it's not like, okay, contained doesn't mean they've put 21% of the fire out. What that means is they've established an effective perimeter. So if you think about a fire, you can think of it like in the shape of a blob. It's a big, growing, fiery blob, that kind of thing, spreading across a map. And then if you think about it, what you're trying to do is if you want to, it's almost like a game or something. You want to be able to draw a barrier using your human resources, your firefighters, and et cetera. You want to draw a barrier around that fire to contain it, to stop that blob from growing in those directions. And so basically you need to draw a line by, creating burn corridors or using, water to create like drenched areas where the fire just goes out. You need to do, by various means and measures, completely encircle the fire to get it to stop growing. And the percentage of the circumference of that containment sphere thing is what we're talking about. So if it's 21% contained, that means that they have that line 21% created. And of course they have to shift that line as the fire grows in different directions and wind carries it pretty rapidly in different ways. Anyway, that's a longer term explanation. Now producer Austin Pelly in the studio with me. Austin, how are you doing this morning?
A little tired. Good to be here, but in case of the Mondays.
Oh yeah.
A long weekend.
I solved it. See, I was worried about a couple of things. I was curious about how Jamarl would be doing, and I also wanted to get a head start on guests in the show today, so I got up a little bit earlier than usual, which means, weirdly enough, when you get up earlier, you often have time to get over being tired instead of feeling more tired, because I technically got less sleep, but it kind of worked out anyway.
When that happens for me, I end up having insane amounts of energy for about 5-6 hours and then hitting a hard wall at about 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can't do anything.
I can see it. I can see it. See, that's where a nap or something like that comes in. You know what I'm going to do? Just because we can, Andre, I'm going to take us to a quick break here, actually. And instead of doing the soapbox, because of course I don't usually step onto that soapbox, and I don't think I ever have. I've never done a big long monologue like that on the show, although I talk for a long time. Anyway, instead of doing that, we're going to be coming back and just having a conversation. I want to cover the Olympics. I want to get into some of the other headlines here with Austin Pelly, of course. Later on this hour, we'll be speaking Really, it'll probably just be me. I'll be speaking with Maram Sousli, partisan girl, Syrian girl. We're going to be talking about the Taliban, major advances in Afghanistan, what that means for China, what that means for Iran, what that means for Russia, and what that means for Syria, the Syrian war/civil war. We'll be talking about the United States, obviously, ongoing, continued involvement with that, although it seems to have lightened over the last year or so. And we'll be talking about the future of that engagement, what its point is at this point. Anyway, all that and more with Maram Sousli when we come back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Although, again, heads up for folks, quickly, Jamarl Thomas, normal co-host of the show, the indefatigable, the ever vigilant, the progressive Jamarl Thomas, he's feeling sick right now. He's sadly feeling under the weather. He has a flu. He's out. He dropped out last Thursday, late Wednesday night, technically, I think it was. And he's been out. And then, again, our producer, Cordell Woodland, he has like some kind of stomach poisoning, some sort of a thing. And so we have exactly 2 out of the 4 people on this crew. Although Andre, I'd like to think that he's part of our crew. That leaves us, he's in, of course, that leaves us with 3 out of 5. So we still have a healthy majority. Anyway, Olympics, the United States won. We won resoundingly, I would think. The 1 gold medal ahead is, it's only 1, but like total medals is pretty far ahead. And we won in both categories. And it wasn't clear there for a while. And I've been making the point about geopolitics and like diplomacy and stuff. We won, man.
I know. I'm so excited. It's so great. I mean, we would have had to have this conversation of like, well, what really matters more, overall medals, which we dominated in, or golds, which China held the lead the entirety of the games. And if they had held on to it for 1 extra day, they would have had it. Then it would be like, oh, well, kind of this back and forth of like, well, we're the best at more things. Okay, well, we're really good at more things with the U.S. and then China. So I'm glad we don't have to have that debate. And we just get to, sit back, American exceptionalism.
Just get to revel in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was talking to Andre. He was like, why does Americans have to be number 1 at everything? We don't, but we do in the Olympics.
So it worked. I mean, it seems like this is the kind of thing countries invest in. We invested in this. This worked. If only we could have done the same thing with COVID. Controversial take, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, that's like jumping here and there. But when I was looking at, I was trying to find some more things to talk about on this today. And one story really stuck out to me. Apparently Mattel, like the really popular toy company,
yep.
Who makes Barbies, they came out with a Tokyo 2020 line of Barbies. So it's all athletes. Not one of them are Asian.
Really?
Really. It's all like you got 2 blonde girls, 2 brunettes, like one of them lighter skin, one of them darker skin, and then a black girl. No Asians whatsoever. And China's like, what the heck?
That's bizarre.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah.
It's almost like a conscious affront or something. That's weird.
I mean, my initial thought was like, okay, they're sticking it to China. But then I'm like, no company's going to outright do that, especially because they're produced in China.
Well, yeah, because something comes to mind about like Western beauty standards and how like maybe they're trying to sell to a market that they would imagine would want, but that want, to appeal to Western beauty standards. But maybe I would guess that would have changed a bit.
Well, then I thought, okay, well, maybe they're just trying to do like, oh, Team USA line. But then like Sunisa Lee is Asian American.
Yes.
And she won gold for us, and she was a big part of our journey there.
Gymnastics, yeah.
I don't know what they're thinking here.
That's weird.
They're going to get canceled.
Yeah. Well, that's where, okay, so the cancel culture stuff a lot of the time is pretty much domestic. It's like, okay, we're bickering with ourselves over one or another issue, and I'm not trying to diminish it. I'm just saying it's mostly an inward-looking issue for the most part. And then, you can get into fights with other countries and then it can get international. But that's a pretty clear case where like, okay, this is an international situation. And it's actually a company that's making this mistake. It just doesn't work. I don't know. It's a different situation.
Mark Wahlberg's getting canceled.
I did not see that. What's he getting canceled over?
He's getting canceled because he put out a post that said, I had to have a serious conversation with my son, I think, like 2 months ago, about how we no longer can use the F word to describe like a gay person.
Really?
That word, but we can't use it in like normal speech. And they were trying to cancel him because they said, you're just now realizing that. So now they're canceling him for choosing not to say it because he's been saying it for up until like a couple months ago.
Okay, well, yeah. That's pretty
Don't say, well, yeah, that's not...
No, but it's true. Both sides of that are funny to me, actually. I can see why the people are canceling him, and then I can see why it's like, but dude, he just stopped doing it. But then it's like, but dude, he just stopped doing it. For how many years this has been the thing you're supposed to stop doing? But at the same time, no, you don't want to punish somebody who's like wising up, even.
But if he finally came to your side, you're going to chastise him for how long he was away?
Yeah.
No, you're going to welcome him in, or at least you should.
Hopefully, yeah. But there is, I don't know, man. This is one of those, you have some people who do the former, some people who do the latter, and culturally it sort of balances out is how I see it. It sort of works out that way. I want to come back to one thing because it's not just, this is something we've been covering pretty consistently on the show. You need, if you've been following it, feel free to comment, Austin, but this is something I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't go into a bit more. Melissa DeRosa, Secretary to Governor Andrew Cuomo, resigning. This is his top aide, basically. His top secretary, you can think of that. But his top aide, one of his closest people, one of his right-hand woman, that kind of person, who, again, has been effectively his bulldog, releasing information on Lindsey Boylan, who's one of his most prominent accusers, dismissing her claims, just basically defending Cuomo. She has now jumped ship. So the person who is closest to him has now decided that he's sunk capital or whatever. He's like, okay, this guy's gone. And then she jumps. That's a big deal. This also comes after more of his accusers have come out with specific claims over the weekend. So in other words, it's getting worse and worse and worse. He has turned on the DNC and the DNC turned on him in his 50-something page document that he released as part of his defense. He hits other Democrats for like, well, if they get away with this, why can't I? In other words, if Joe Biden can have these Tara Reade accusations and touch women and girls in weird, awkward, avuncular, acting like a weird old uncle, those kinds of ways. If he can do that, why can't I? Now, on the one hand, totally, he's accurate. But on the other hand, what the hell kind of defense is that? You're turning on your friends like a life raft? Oh, you're trying to cling to them for stability, dragging them down under in the process. It's not going to do him any good. In the process, everybody turns on him, of course. That's where we are now. Anyway.
It's not going to do him any good, but I mean, it's a relevant question. Yes. I mean, have we fully looked into those accusations against Sleepy Joe?
We haven't. No, and this is why I'm kind of waiting until Jamarl gets back because he brought the idea. But and because she is his guest, kind of. But Tara Reade, one of the more prominent accusers, the most prominent accuser of Joe Biden sexual assault back in the day. Why isn't she getting more air coverage? That's a very valid question. We wanted to talk to her. We wanted to bring her on the show.
Is she coming on?
We can book her, but I want to get her for when he comes back. So we can both have the conversation, and that's kind of still up in the air. So, but yeah, it's 100% a valid question. It's just I can ask it, but at the same time, it's not going to work. And I know it's not going to help. Yeah, it's not going to help him for sure. I'm glad that he asked it because it's like always worth bringing back up on the one hand, but for him, it's a mistake.
I think the Melissa DeRosa move was entirely to save face. I think that because I think for cancel culture as well, I think that if it comes out, if she's in the news with Cuomo the entire step of the way through this investigation, she's going to get blacklisted. And so she can just kind of quietly slip out, and like Cuomo did with the nursing home scandal before it got brought into the light with this.
Yeah.
She's just going to quietly slip out, just recuse herself, and then in the press release, she was like, I've been dealing with some mental stuff for 2 years, and it was the right time. the perfect right time for her.
I believe it. And the mental stuff would only be getting worse as time has gone on, I'm sure, as this whole thing has grown. I mean, that's the other side of this is, okay, so there are crimes committed here. I don't know the specific statutes in New York, but you got to think, if other people were aware of what was happening, so if I'm a witness to sexual assault and like I'm a part of an administration, and it's not just sexual assault, but it's like an employee being assaulted, by the employer effectively in the context of the government. If I'm his official and I'm a witness to that, and hey, okay, pre-investigation, what am I saying? It's not only do I report that, but if it gets circulated in-house, do I shut that down? If word about this, if there's like, before the FBI, before the AG decides to get involved, you've got to imagine there are rumblings about this. And if she's trying to shut that down, which you can only think she would be, what is that? Is she legally culpable? That's what I'm trying to ask here. Is she involved? And then,
that's a good question.
My thing then is, what does this jumping ship mean? Is she trying to save herself? Has she already cleaned her hands? How did she feel about it while it was happening? Is she one of those people who was clinging to him because she was like, he and I have a working relationship. He's the most powerful person in the state government. All I want to do is good in politics. I'm trying to.
She was the
empathize
second most
with somebody.
powerful.
What do you say?
She was the second most powerful.
That's also the other case. Yeah.
I don't think at this point it matters what she was thinking or why she did it. I think that what matters is she did it.
Yeah, what she did.
And she was actively covering it up.
Yes.
So at least allegedly. So, I mean, I think she's trying to recuse herself from the situation before it gets found out that like she definitively did do this. Save her own face and just kind of slip out in the background and then move on to other things.
Yeah. And that strategy can maybe sometimes work. I don't know. But the question is if what are they going to actually do? What do they have the power to do? What's going to happen to Cuomo specifically if they can't get him? Are they going to have to go after the people around him? Would it help regardless to go after the people around him? Or are they just on a manhunt? Who's they? That's the question here. I don't know.
His accusers, at least I think two of them have already said that they're going to take him to court.
Yeah, civil suits. But then you'd hope that this becomes a major criminal suit if there's enough evidence to go on. That's the hope.
Right, but couldn't the accusers can take him to criminal court?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I think they already are.
But. Yeah, no, but I don't know. I want this to turn into as large a thing as possible, basically, because there's serious stuff here. And you know what? If I'm being really honest, this is all sort of should be playing second fiddle to the main scandal, of course, which is him killing the grandmothers, and grandfathers. I'm not kidding. There are thousands of people who the scandal as it initially broke wasn't that he killed people. It was that statistically he hid their cause of death to paint his cover, his handling, his administration's handling of this stuff in a more positive light. But really what happened also is he probably killed a lot of people. In other words, there were nursing homes in New York State, and a lot of people were getting sick early COVID. He moves, these people get moved into hospitals. Then some of those people get moved back into nursing homes. And it's not proved when they're getting moved back into the nursing homes whether or not they've fully recovered from COVID. In other words, when they get moved back in, they could still be spreading it. Now, he's saying they've said that they followed CDC guidance on this one, but they didn't. They moved to do this independently. They could have, decided to do different stuff. This is basically of their own volition how they handled this. In other words, they could have tested people before moving them back, or they could have, kept them for longer periods, worked out emergency facilities, done those kinds of things, broadly speaking. Instead, they miscounted them so that people who were moved, who were moved from nursing homes to hospitals and then died in the hospitals were counted as hospital deaths, not as nursing home deaths, basically to lower the appearance of people in nursing homes dying, to make it look like they were just people in hospitals dying. So it's just that's not as not as significant. What's really bad is moving people back into the nursing homes and back into these facilities where it would spread like wildfire, the most vulnerable people, without knowing that they've fully recovered from it. It's doing that and then hiding that. That's the real scandal. That's the killing part. That wasn't even the big thing and people often forget about, and certainly isn't what's getting looked at right now. Killing people you'd think is a lot worse than sexually harassing people, and rape is bad. I don't mean to, but serial killers, I would think objectively, if you kill dozens or hundreds of people, if Cuomo killed 1,000 people, if he was in charge of an administration that killed 1,000 people, I don't know exactly. I'm not God. I can't judge his soul. But so I don't know exactly how to apportion the blame out, how many hundreds of those deaths he's culpable for personally, maybe all of them. But surely that's a major weight on the scale. Anyway, we need to go into a break.
Yeah, you don't gotta convince me to go after Cuomo. I mean,
yes,
he can go behind bars for all I care.
I hope something like that happens, but I also hope it happens fully for the right reasons. We've got to go into a break. We'll be coming back with Maram Sousli, political commentator and geopolitical analyst, talking about the Taliban's advances in Afghanistan, what this means for China and Iran. I wonder, this is a subject I've gotten into before. And so far, it's been shot down. The idea that this is in part an intentional State Department play, something like that. I wonder if they're even like behind the scenes, what we've said to the Taliban behind the scenes. I don't know, because this creates a major lingering unstable country in the region on the borders of Iran, Russia, and China, who are our main foes on the entire Eurasian continent, effectively. I just see this is kind of convenient. Anyway, I'm going to be coming back with Maram Sousli. We're going to be talking about all this and more, also the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and other topics. On the other side of this short break, you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And I'm back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Although, quick heads up for folks. Jamarl Thomas, normal host, co-host of the show, he is not feeling well. He's feeling under the weather with a flu or something like it. We're pretty sure it's not COVID, just based on the symptoms. Anyway, he is at home. Thought he might be coming back in today. He will hopefully be coming back in as soon as tomorrow. But he's out. I am, nevertheless, joined, and I'm very, very happy to be joined by her, by Maram Sousli, political commentator and geopolitical analyst. Maram, thank you for joining me this morning. How are you doing?
Hi, thanks for having me on. I'm happy to be here. I'm doing well.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Great to have you. Looking forward to this conversation. For those listening, Maram Sousli, again, political commentator, geopolitical analyst. Follow her on Facebook and Twitter at Partisan Girl. Find her on YouTube by searching for Syrian Girl Partisan, and support her on Patreon at patreon.com/Syrian Girl. All right, let's get into it. The Taliban has taken effectively 5 provincial capitals within the past handful of days. I think it's about 4 days at this point. Anyway, that's more than one major city per day, regionally at least. They're moving across the north. They say they have upwards of 85% of the rural territories, and that number appears to be rising rapidly. And along with it, quite a few of the urban territories as well. In other words, they're simply taking the country. And then the U.S., within the last couple of months, has not only announced our withdrawal, but rapidly been pulling troops out by many accounts, and is supposed to be fully withdrawn by September 11th, just about a month away, a little bit over a month away. So we've effectively created this situation, waged a war for almost 20 years, and then collapsed after the government that we created and then tried to prop up, as that's in the process of failing completely. And then here's what's interesting to me is what this creates, this sort of lingering source of instability and, is it weaponized Islamist potential terrorism and just in general, a sort of constant political system in that region in the Middle East, affecting Iran, affecting Russia, affecting China, affecting major neighbors that we have increasingly come to consider as foes. I see this stuff happening, and I wonder if it's intentional. And so far, when I've spoken with people, they've said they don't think it is. and usually I've listened to them, but I still kind of wonder about it. Moran, what do you think? Do you see this as if, you know, I'm not saying that this was what our plan was from the get-go, but that we got involved and then we have tried to make a sort of strategic retreat or something like that, leaving this as a time bomb for our quote-unquote enemies in the region and, you know, the neighbors of Afghanistan. What's your take on that, Moran?
Well, I think that we have to ask ourselves, why now? You know, it's been a 20-year war. Why now? What has fundamentally shifted? I don't think it's, you know, I think they could have gone on longer, to be honest, even though it's a big sinkhole monetarily. If they wanted to stay, they could have stayed. So we really got to ask ourselves, why now? Did they suddenly grow a conscience? I don't think so. So, you know, when we talk about whether or not it's intentional and whether or not it's going to create instability, my fear is that people will misinterpret that as advocating for the US to continue to occupy Afghanistan. Because in the last 20 years, the country itself was made unstable by that occupation, and was made like the poverty. It's remained in poverty. 20 years, nothing has changed. The destruction was still wrought upon them, and sometimes, in some cases, the situation has changed for the worse. Because not only did many thousands die, but also, and many homes were destroyed, but also, you know, some of the elements that were put into power were drug lords, and they trafficked children. So this is all documented. So I do think it's a good thing for the US to pull out, 100%.
Yeah.
But you have to question their intentions. And I think we have a right to question them. I think that even though the Taliban has showed resilience and has fought from the mountains, and you know, they call Afghanistan the graveyard of empires for a reason. It's very difficult to defeat a guerrilla war or, you know, guerrilla soldiers in such a landscape. And Russia failed in the past also. But the question is, why now? And I think it has a lot to do with a pivot towards, you know, 20 years ago, they were trying to take down like Saddam Hussein and the Taliban, and they were claiming that they want to fight Al-Qaeda. This was after, you know, 9/11. They used that as a launching pad to, you know, push for all these wars. But recently, Al-Qaeda is not really on the tips of anyone's tongues in foreign policy. In fact, in Syria, Al-Qaeda is seen as the good guys, and the head of Al-Qaeda, al-Jawlani, got an interview with PBS, and they're whitewashing his war crimes. So this represents a huge pivot in U.S. foreign policy. And I think, you know, in the past, the U.S. has worked with Al-Qaeda numerous times, and perhaps specifically in the northwest of China, in Xinjiang province, they hope to create some kind of upheaval. And Xinjiang province in China borders Afghanistan. Perhaps they intend to use that as a launching pad for some kind of militia warfare against China.
That's the weird thing about the like extremely bloody, brutal games the United States has played in the Middle East for profit and power and just control and more. You know, supporting Al-Qaeda, supporting the Mujahideen, supporting Islamist forces, and then turning on them. And then there are these attacks, 9/11 happens, and this whole process, there's this back and forth where it's due to the gravity of the situation, I'm extremely hesitant to use the term, but also it's so absurd. We're like frenemies with them. There's this weird thing where we kill us, I mean, they kill us, we kill them, and then we are willing to fund not literally the same groups immediately after, but different associated groups in different regions, even at the same time. The whole process is so discordant that it's like you can justify anything. It's almost like a 1984 dystopian sense. You can make sense of it. The logic just works because the logic doesn't work on a very deep level. We can use it to justify so much. And again, I'm not saying that this retreat, I think that you're right, it's mostly the time is what's important to look at about it. Because technically we could have withdrawn it at any point and it would have been, my argument could apply. But even then, the pivot to Asia, the idea that we might decide to re-intervene, or that, that if the Taliban, if the government's been truly out of control, we can always use that as a justification to re-invade if it's politically expedient at the time. And if it's a couple of years down the line, then maybe we've saved on whatever costs we might have paid to be in the country in the meanwhile. In other words, maybe this is just a temporary withdrawal. Or we could potentially work with the Taliban government, potentially, as weird as that may sound now, or we overthrow one that comes down the pike, and in a couple of years, ideally have another seat for power. In other words, there's so many different ways that we can play this, that this almost feels like it inevitably has to be temporary, which is so sad to just think about on a deep level. But really, I think this is about a pivot to Asia and a pivot to China, and I think that you were kind of hinting at that earlier. We were talking a bit before you came on about Xinjiang and about the Uyghurs and that whole situation. And this does seem, I mean, regionally, it's pretty close. It's just a hop, skip, and a jump over the desert there in terms of the distances that you're traveling. More than that, of course, but it's fairly close by. So trying to leave a local, power center for Islamist groups, and much of the support historically has come from Afghanistan, if I'm not incorrect about this, right, Maram, for terrorist groups operating in Xinjiang specifically, or Uyghurs, some of them.
Well, actually, I suppose it's kind of in reverse, because a lot of the Uyghurs crossed the border into Afghanistan to fight the U.S. occupation, and a lot of them ended up in Guantanamo Bay. So the Taliban, on the other hand, that's the interesting thing. When the U.S. was pulling out, the Taliban is now talking with China, and everybody assumed they're going to take the side of the Uyghurs. But as a matter of fact, they said, we don't have any problem with China and we're not going to interfere with their internal affairs. So I think that is a huge loss for anyone in these Washington think tanks if they thought that the Taliban is automatically going to be, a spoiler for China. It seems like China somehow they made a deal with them. And it's not out of question that the U.S. would make a deal with the Taliban, because they have in the past, as you said, with the Mujahideen. And I really like your analogy, Orwell's 84, because basically the flags change and the enemy of yesterday becomes the friends of today. So 20 years ago, the Uyghurs were being put in Guantanamo Bay for terrorism, and now we're against them being put in camps, but because China's doing it. So it's kind of... It's funny if you're old enough to remember, or if you have the ability to, bring up stuff that's being dropped in the memory hole as we speak. So I think that the plan, at least the plan, is to try to put in a government in Afghanistan that would be, they would assume should be antagonistic towards China. But for now, the Taliban hasn't agreed to be that thing. They're making alliances with China, in fact. When it comes to Iran, this should be interesting because, actually, Iran was sort of on the U.S.'s side at the start of the war in Afghanistan. They supported the Northern Alliance, which was the militia that fought the Taliban. So I would be curious to see what kind of position this leaves Iran in, because, of course, Afghanistan also borders Iran, and their border with Iran is a lot bigger than their border with China. But yeah, that's the final thing I want to say about that is the Uyghurs can go ahead and fight without the support of the Taliban, because of course they have inroads with Al-Qaeda, and they can just use the Taliban might not be able to control every part of the entirety of Afghanistan, and they could just use their border as a launch pad without the Taliban's permission.
Makes sense. I can see that. You know what? On that, I'm going to take us to it's not even an early break. We're actually right about on time here, but I'm going to take us to our break because you wrote an article. You were briefly banned from Twitter for talking about the Uyghurs. And in a weird way, this brings us to Israel and Palestine, just because of the hypocrisy with the way that the genocide and speaking about this stuff gets handled. In other words, when people question the idea that Palestinians are being, are the victims of genocide, when people question that prospect on social media, they don't tend to be systematically suppressed for it. They don't tend to, get taken off of Twitter or Facebook pretty regularly because they'll have people who find them and flag their posts and manage to mob them and get them taken down. Unlike the Uyghurs, there's this asymmetry in how those things are handled. We're going to be coming back talking about that with Maram. She got banned from Twitter briefly. She's back on now, but she wrote an article over at RT. We're going to be hitting that when we come back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Jamarl Thomas out of the studio today, not feeling well, hopefully back soon. For now, though, it's me, occasionally joined by producer Austin Pelly, and Maram Sousli, partisan girl, Syrian girl, is on the line. We'll be back with Maram on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and digs straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And I'm back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Jamarl Thomas out of the studio today with a flu, or at least something like it. We really don't think it's COVID. Also, producer Cordell Woodland out sick today as well with food poisoning. I am in the studio. Producer Austin Pelly is in the studio, and I'm joined on the line by Maram Sousli. She is a political commentator, geopolitical analyst, also a longtime guest on the show, and a guest for much longer on the show than I've been on this show. You can follow Maram on Facebook and Twitter at Partisan Girl. You can find her on YouTube by searching for Syrian Girl Partisan, and you can support her on Patreon at patreon.com/Syrian Girl. And we're talking about an article of hers that's over on RT. I'm going to read the title of this article. Twitter will allow you to deny the genocide of Palestinians, but not a Uyghur genocide. And parts in quotes. So I've been banned. And again, this was published just a couple of days ago. Now, they put you back up. This was published 2 days ago over at RT as an op-ed. And you're now back up on Twitter, right, Maram?
Yeah, I was actually put back the same day that the article came out, which is a crazy coincidence, wouldn't you think? I'm just being sarcastic.
So what was the deal with this? Tell us what you were talking about in the article. I'll let you lead us.
So essentially, my tweet kind of was highlighting the hypocrisy of the media and these human rights groups, and particularly the governments of like NATO, who are leveling the accusation of genocide against China towards the Uyghur group without showing like anyone being driven from their homes or anyone being killed. But on the other hand, when it comes to Palestine, when we've all borne witness to the fact that people are being driven from their homes, or their entire apartment building blocks are being destroyed, so their homes are being destroyed, and they're being killed like that because they just happen to be not Jewish, so their ethnicity is the wrong one. But they don't level the accusation of genocide against the Jewish state. So that to me is a hypocrisy. And my tweet highlighted that, saying there is a Palestinian genocide, but there is no Uyghur genocide. And that got flagged and got me banned. So at first I thought maybe this is just a, artificial intelligence mistake. So I contacted Twitter support and I said, maybe this is just a mistake that you've made. And they said, no, we're going to maintain your block because you broke the terms of service by denying a violent event. So specifically because I said that that what's happening to Uyghurs in China does not constitute a genocide. Yes, you can say they're being put in a camp, but being put in a camp under terrorism suspicions doesn't constitute a genocide. But what's happening to Palestinians, what has been happening for the last 60, 70 years, including the Nakba, where, hundreds of thousands of them were driven out. That's why, when Israel was created, that does constitute a genocide. So it just, whilst the tweet highlighted the hypocrisy, the fact that Twitter banned me over denying, that what's happening to Uyghurs constitutes a genocide, but not banning anyone that, denies what's happening to Palestinians constitutes a genocide. That too just, points to the fact that I was right. There is a hypocrisy. There is a double standard. Now, I was able to get my Twitter back, and I got an apology from Twitter saying that they banned me in error, but that was only after the RT article came out. So make of that what you will.
And it's still weird. I mean, it's good. Of course, it's good that they put you back, but you shouldn't have been taken down in the first place. And the fact that you were the hair trigger around these things. I mean, I'll put it like this: the Holocaust happened, and it was bad. To be clear, and to back up what the moral sentiment of pretty much everybody for like the last 80 years, 70 plus years at least. It's bad. That's the idea. And it happened in large numbers. And then there are quite a few people who will like sort of either quibble around the edges about the exact numbers or say that it didn't happen. And I think society is right in largely rejecting those people because there's something particularly bad about what happened here. But the trouble happens when you have this idea, okay, that's genocide. And then you invent that you start to use the term genocide, and it has this serious moral weight. And then at some point, like pretty recently, I would argue this is the first time it's really happened, you abuse the term. I can't think of, it's not like I feel like the Rwandan genocide, for instance, that as a term is justified. I don't feel like that, is used to abuse the situation, or that term is manipulative in the context of what actually happened. But it does feel that way with this. And, when right after the claim first came out, it was Pompeo who said it just within the past, the latest, like the last month of the Trump administration. Pompeo accused China of genocide. Then Blinken, of course, Biden's Secretary of State, the next Secretary of State, doubled down on that, also accused China of it. Jamarl and I on the air at the time, as were a lot of people, were like, this is crazy. This is setting us up for a humanitarian war, humanitarian intervention in China, basically. If they're guilty of genocide, well, for one thing, we shouldn't be trading with them, full stop. We should cut all ties, all relationships. If they're guilty of that level of moral travesty, if we're taking this seriously, stop that, because they're evil, that kind of thing. If we were to take the logic seriously. But furthermore, that would be justification for a war, at least according to the whole neocon way of doing things. And yet we're not doing it. So then there's this question of what is, what's the point of it? And one of the other things that I wasn't thinking about as much at the time, but is totally true, is this kind of thing, the systematic suppression. It's taking the energy that people feel about denying the Holocaust and associating it with denying the Uyghur genocide, even though you should question whether or not that genocide is even happening based on available evidence, right, Maram?
Absolutely right. Like, I believe in people's inalienable right to free speech and their ability to decide for themselves what's happening. So, but you make a very good comparison. Like, they're using the fact that there's all of this negative connotation behind denying the Holocaust to compare it to denying the responsibility to protect lies that lead to the next humanitarian war. For example, if you deny that Iraq has WMDs, now that's just as bad. You can put it that way. And nobody is actually accusing, even the State Department isn't accusing China of actually committing violence and massacres against the Uyghurs. What they've tried to do is redefine the term genocide as a cultural genocide alone, by claiming that Uyghurs are not allowed to practice their cultural identity based on their ethnicity. Now, if that is the definition of genocide, then you can most certainly say that there's a genocide being committed against Palestinians, because they're not even allowed to raise their flag. And they're not allowed to go to Al-Aqsa Mosque without getting smoke bombs thrown at them, or being dragged away, or having their churches being burned. So it's a double-edged sword for them. But the point is that the term genocide has legal consequences at the United Nations. Ironically, the term ethnic cleansing does not. And ironically, like if you were to commit mass slaughter against one nation, for example, the US is currently starving millions and millions of Syrians of wheat and oil, but that's not a genocide, because in order for it to be a genocide, you have to prove that Syrians make an ethnicity. And that's how they even get around the Palestinian thing, because by claiming that like Palestinians or the people of the Levant aren't a unique ethnicity. That's how they get around driving people out in ethnic cleansing. So there's all these technicalities, and the only way that they can, they're so manipulative. At the end of the day, it's about the fact that people in Palestine are being killed for not being Jewish and being driven out of their homes. No one's being driven out of their homes in China, but no one's being killed in China, but they're just trying to change the definition of genocide to fit so that they can make a legal case at the UN against China. And of course, they're probably going to arm the most extremist element if they can eventually. I think that's what it's leading to. It's going to lead to actual violence. That's what they want. That's what all of these lies are about. It's about leading to real violence at the end of the day.
Yes. Well, and I can also, I think you can like be skeptical or suspicious or critical of China for their treatment of the Uyghurs. And I'm not even here to really, I'm not trying to say who can say what about what. I'm not trying to say no, you can't say it's a genocide. But it seems like it's jumping the shark to me. It seems like it's a way too sharp a claim. It seems like it's an abuse of the term. It seems like manipulation, human rights violation, or something like that. Seems like it. If you think that's what it is, that's appropriate. And to be clear, there's something, like large re-education camps. That's weird, and in my book, bad. Maybe just because I'm more westernized or liberal-minded or something like that. But you can be critical of that without going to the nth degree. There's one more thing, though. That
but unfortunately,
go for it.
If you don't go, but that doesn't have any international law connotations to it. That's why they're jumping the shark with the genocide thing.
Yeah, you can't use that as a red line, as a legal red line.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Exactly right.
So this is completely unrelated, complete tangent. But Maram, you've moved. You're based in Australia, in Perth specifically, right now, right?
Yes, exactly right.
I'm just curious. We've gotten callers about this specifically. We've got one caller, Michael, calls in from Sydney sometimes, and he called in the other day. Kind of, I don't, whether or not you're listening, Michael. A little bit like panicked or frantic or something about that. And I can believe it, and I understand why. About the state of the lockdowns in his city, where police were going around, and it was serious. I forget some of the specifics of what he was saying, but it sounded kind of bad. I'm just curious. That's Australia. I haven't seen that stuff happening in the States, but I've seen major protests across Europe, and then sometimes fairly violent pushback against the protesters. Have you seen anything like that in Perth? I know that Perth is a bit quieter than Sydney, but not too much.
Interestingly, here in Perth, we've been the premier of Perth, of Western Australia, very early on. He decided that he's going to eliminate any way of the virus getting in. So we haven't had any outbreaks to warrant any kind of long lockdowns as a result of his policy. Yeah.
So it worked.
He basically made the state into an island. So we had maybe just at the very start of the coronavirus, we had lockdowns, and then we had like 3 days of lockdowns just like a couple of months ago, and that's it.
So then what's served to contain it? I'm guessing it's a slightly less populated region, but Perth is still a major city. If it's that light a lockdown, is it like travel bans? We've only got a couple of seconds left, Maram, but any quick last words on that?
Yes, travel bans, and Western Australia is separated from the rest of Australia by like a 4-hour flight and a lot of desert. So we just happen to be lucky.
That's kind of what I was thinking. And then of course you have Perth to the west there, southwest. We got to close it out. Maram Sousli, good talking with you as always. Thank you very much for joining me. A geopolitical analyst. Do go check her out on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all over the place. Partisan girl, Syrian girl, Maram Sousli. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in just a second with headlines and another 2 hours of this morning show. You ready?
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another hour, the second to last this morning, also the second hour this morning, of the most disruptive show covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states we call America and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, really the only corner this time, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan, and in the non-existent left corner, you have your indefatigable, you're ever vigilant, your last man on the wall, last burning ember, Jamarl Thomas, progressive co-host and political analyst on this show. He is out sick right now, I'm sad to say. He has a fever and a flu, I believe. He's at home. I don't know that we've spoken once on the phone in the last couple of days. It's just been text, saving his weathered voice. I'm sure he's not feeling well. He will hopefully be back, probably by remotely, not in the studio. Hopefully we'll be back tomorrow or the next day, something like that. Anyway, together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Hardly my overly long intro, but I really want to give Jamarl his due, particularly at the top of the hour. Introducing the hour, I want to make sure that he has his spiritual moment in time on this show. Because we were up in the air until about 40 minutes before the show started about whether or not he'd be joining us, but he was like, I can't do it. I'm sorry, guys. And I understand. I've been there. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into headlines. First up in COVID news, there are about 36,000 new COVID cases reported yesterday in the United States. There were also about 131 new deaths reported. This follows a very high number of new cases on Friday, specifically 168,343 new cases reported on Friday. That was like, I was looking at the last major steep uphill section of the chart of new cases because you're trying to look at trends over time, and it was in like mid-November last year, and I remember we were slowly climbing up that mountain for what felt like months and months and months heading into winter, although it was only just about a month and a half, something like that in sum total after the fall from the summer wave anyway. And looking at the chart, we're like most of the way up that mountain now, but we still got a ways to go. Cases, assuming that same exact curve, cases will peak, they'll then fall. That'll be, over the course of the next couple of months. So a couple of months where it grows and then comes back down, growing over the next month, say. Now that's if the cases follow the previous trajectory, and who knows? All bets are off. Who knows what's actually going to happen? It could be much worse. The curve could look different. All sorts of different things could happen. My point is, though, a lot of new cases last Friday. Last time we saw it this bad was going into winter, which is the worst this virus, this pandemic, has been yet, late last year, and we'll see where it goes from here. This comes as the number of total fully vaccinated folks in the American public has been stagnant for a while now. It's at 50%. 58% of residents have received at least one dose. We recently reached our 70+% of adults vaccinated goal. It's about a month late. We wanted to get there July 4th. We got there early August. Within the last week it was. At this point, the coronavirus has infected about 35,812,000 people across the United States. It's also killed about 616,594 of us. Starting today, people in France will now have to show a health pass in order to enter bars, cafes, restaurants, and long-distance trains. This extends a current requirement of the health pass from those attending concerts, cinemas, and museums. And again, this extends it to bars, cafes, restaurants, and long-distance trains. Earlier this year in July, last month, Emmanuel Macron announced that healthcare workers would have to be vaccinated by September 15th, or they would be banned from work and not paid. In national news, Melissa DeRosa, that's the former secretary to Governor Andrew Cuomo, she has just resigned. That's amid the investigation of sexual assault against Cuomo. Multiple accusers saying they would file against him. These would be criminal cases. In the allegations, DeRosa has been accused of taking part in the retaliation against his accusers. Specifically, in the accusation made by Lindsey Boylan, DeRosa was said to consistently scream at staff for illogical things. Then, after that accusation was released, DeRosa reportedly released Boylan's confidential information to the public. after Boylan came out with her story. So in other words, Lindsay Boylan publishes this story, and I believe that she's talked about this. She talked about this with people for years, but she hadn't really gone public in a huge way. So word about Cuomo's sexual harassment / assault starts to break out earlier this year, just a couple of months ago. Lindsay Boylan comes out with this good long medium piece, like a thick piece that is well written, very readable, good, easy to get into, sort of like anecdotal and story rich in that sense. It situates you and puts you into her shoes. She releases that, and then this top secretary aide to Cuomo comes out publishing her information, confidential information, specifically retaliatory. Anyway, this is how close this person is to Cuomo. This is Cuomo's trusted right-hand woman, Melissa DeRosa. Anyway, she has just resigned. She has just jumped ship. It is the parasites, the rats, the mollusks that are the last to jump ship, if they ever do, when those things are going down. We'll see where she goes from here, but Andrew Cuomo is not looking too good. I'll come back to that in a minute. Moving on with other national political news. The Senate is reportedly moving closer to passing infrastructure after passing the major infrastructure bill, specifically after a vote last night to end debate, and another vote to pass the bill is due to come tomorrow. This is a much diminished bill from the original package, which was multi-trillions in size. This one's about $1 trillion less. Democrats are also reportedly looking to move forward with another package of soft infrastructure that they're looking to pass using budget reconciliation. This would be effectively unvetoable, but they'd need to get it right, and they'd still need enough of the votes to pass it. The Minneapolis City Council is revisiting the total disbandment of the police department in an upcoming vote. The officers would be replaced with a quote-unquote comprehensive public health approach and quote-unquote licensed peace officers if necessary. The movement would also put the new department not directly under the power of the mayor's office. Activist groups have raised more than $1 million and collected over 20,000 signatures for this move. I think I want to come back to that one because we honestly, we should have hit this one in the 7 o'clock headlines, but in the minute or so, we'll see how long it is. In a couple of minutes that Austin's going to be in here, I want to talk about this with him. In international news, heavy clashes have broken out in northern Afghanistan as the Taliban continues its offensive there. They've taken 5 provincial capitals from government forces in just the last handful of days. This assault comes ahead of the planned withdrawal by the United States from Afghanistan this September 11th, just over a month away at this point. Although we have been withdrawing our forces quite quickly, I hear, in the period leading up to that. And we had a good conversation about this, I did really, with Maram Sousli in the last half hour. It started about 7:30. We talked about that for 15 minutes, and moved into we're getting banned from Twitter briefly for talking about the Uyghur genocide, quote unquote. In other international news, officials in Mali say that more than 40 civilians and 12 troops were killed by Islamist militias in northern Mali and nearby in Burkina Faso. That's the 12 troops killed in Burkina Faso. The president of Burkina Faso said on Twitter that his country continues to, quote, wage without concession the war the obscurantist and barbaric forces have imposed on our country, end quote. Anytime I see the word obscurantist used, and it's usually seeing it, not hearing it, because usually it's writers who do that, not people. It does bring a little chuckle to my spirit, a little happiness to my heart somewhere for some reason. Anyway, moving on to more bad headlines. A man was shot dead in Lebanon while arguing at a petrol station, with the fight escalating from using fists to knives, then eventually to using a gun. This is the latest high-profile crime in a situation of increasing economic desperation. Again, to remind folks about the plight of Beirut, Lebanon. Last year, a warehouse was used as the shell casing for a bomb that went off, apparently accidentally, although there are there's ample speculation that it was intentional, that the Israelis did it, or the CIA did it, or some Lebanese person did it. There are these different theories that I've seen about who exactly did it. But basically, a warehouse, like an entire building, was used as the shell casing for a bomb that was storing fireworks and ammonium nitrate, this chemical that acted as an accelerant, reportedly, with the fireworks to explode this building. And it was in a port of Beirut. It was, it's the port. It's a major trade center for this major trade hub in the Middle East. Beirut's a big trade hub in the region. Port got devastated, effectively leveled. It was like a crater, from a meteor that suddenly hit. hundreds of people killed, thousands injured, city nearby either leveled or simply ruined, windows blown in and such. Anyway, that was just the icing on the cake. That was just a really bad incident that made an already bad situation worse, where the economy of Lebanon was in shambles and the political system was in disarray. There'd been ongoing protests for years. It wasn't a good situation. That made it worse. And this is just a small crime that we're seeing as a result of that. In Olympic news, the most challenging Olympic journey, quote unquote, has been officially declared closed by the IOC chief yesterday. The final results of the games puts Russian athletes at 5th place with 71 medals, 20 of them gold. Great Britain is in 4th place with 65 medals, 22 of them gold. Japan is in 3rd place with 58 medals, 27 of those are gold. China is in 2nd place with 88 medals, 38 are gold. And the USA is in 1st place on both counts with 113 medals, 39 of which are gold medals. In the last day of the games, the U.S. won gold in volleyball, track cycling, and basketball. That pushed us 1 gold above China, and we won in both gold and overall medal counts. And the whole narrative here is that we'd been leading in the overall medal counts pretty darn consistently for like the whole thing, I believe, or most of it at least. And then we just barely squeaked by from the underdog position behind. It was like we were drafting them. I'm thinking in terms of bike races. You're drafting somebody, a bicycle race. You're drafting somebody. You know, you're riding right behind them in their little air train, sucking up all the energy they're using up, and you're drafting on them. And then you take the lead right at the last minute. You get all aggressive. You sprint. You get out ahead of them right at the last minute. That's, I would like to think, what we did here in the Olympics. In Earth and Science news, the United Nations has come out with its most definitive report yet on the subject of global warming, deciding unequivocally that mankind is to blame for the accelerated pace of global warming, also warning that every region on Earth will become increasingly likely to experience extreme weather disruption as these trends continue. The Dixie Fire has become the 2nd largest fire in California history. The blaze has already spread across 4 counties. It's burning an area larger than New York City. Only 21% of that fire has been labeled as contained, and 4 firefighters have been sent to the hospital so far. And as we'll be talking about in just a couple of minutes with Peter Oliver, there's also a fire raging in Greece and in Turkey. It's not a single fire, but it's a sort of fire complex driven by extremely high temperatures. It's a bad situation. You're burning near Athens, clearly a major city, also burning in Asia Minor, Anatolia, on the east side of the Aegean Sea in Turkey, and burning in the Balkans too, burning near, I believe, Serbia's capital. I'm just burning broadly all around the region. Again, extremely high temperatures. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So, Austin, we've come to split writing up headlines in the morning. And then sometimes, like, Jamarl will throw things in there. Sometimes I think Cordell writes some up, specifically during the Olympics. He was writing some up. But for the most part, it's you and me writing these. I'll write some, you'll write some. One of the ones that you added this morning had to do with Minneapolis and their police department thing, and trading out the police department for the peace department, and basically just completing the defund, like getting rid of the police department. Now, this is an initiative that they're trying to pass.
Well, yes, they are. But to my understanding, most of defund the police is really like reallocate funds in the police.
Yeah.
This is like one of the standout instances where they're like, let's just disband the whole thing.
Yes. And
let's create our own thing. It's going to be like public health approach. There's going to be social programs. There's going to be peace officers and all that. And at first I was like, what are you doing? You're going to cause so many unwanted crimes are just going to go unpunished. And then it's just going to incentivize more crime, yada, yada, yada. And now I'm just like, you know what? I'm not going to win that argument. Let's just let him do it.
No, that's the thing.
Let's let him do it. And let's see what happens. Let's see your murder rates go up. Let's see your petty crime skyrocket. Let's see all this happen, because you can't solve everything with a peaceful talk. Let's see it.
It's true. That's the bitter side. The sad thing is, what happens arguably is we already live in clown world. We already live in 1984. Is that they do that. It gets worse. They refuse to talk about how it's getting worse. They blame it on people having guns, for instance, whatever. They blame it on X or Y or Z issues. And they basically don't talk about how they screwed things up by getting rid of the only thing that was keeping like this wave of crime back. And, you know, it doesn't like go to complete hell immediately. It takes a while to get worse. I could see that happening, but I don't think it's going to pass. I just don't think they're going to get there. I think people value the police too much.
Yeah, well, the mayor is a huge part of why it won't really pass.
Yeah.
Or that's what's being projected. But they got more than double the signatures required to get it on the ballot. And the majority of the city council is in favor.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
but
man.
the mayor can block it.
Oh, God. Oh, God. Well,
so he will block it.
There you go. Majority of the city council is in favor. I don't know. And maybe, who knows? Maybe I'm wrong and too cynical, and maybe they're onto something. I kind of doubt it. But these are what political, you know, what the whole statehood idea is for. And even then, local municipalities, of course. You want, you know, to give people the room to experiment.
I mean, not with people's lives.
That's all that we have to experiment with.
You're literally talking about experimenting with people's property, their lives.
Yes.
Like, in general. If I was in that city, I would say, this passes, I'm out.
It's true. And I'm looking at that a bit more clinically. Technically, I think if I were to talk in terms of how most people do about political philosophy, it's okay. These guys are represented by these politicians. And so in some sense, it's given them the mandate to try to change these things, especially after last year's unwarranted protests and the undoubted public sentiment that, you know, suggests that there's support here, maybe presumptively. I don't know.
Who do you think the peace officers would be? I'm thinking like psychologists.
Oh, well, that maybe. I don't trust any of these people, man. It could be Teddy from down on the street corner, and they would probably do a better job than a lot of psychologists. We've had conversations in the back room about social workers before, and I've seen it firsthand.
So you think that a social worker is going to walk into a bank that's being held up by three armed robbers and talk them down?
No, God, no. That's the thing. It doesn't work. I'm in agreement. Ultimately, I'm in agreement. I don't think it's going to work. It's ridiculous. No, they can't do that. And no, of course, they have to have some people who are armed. No, are you going to take the psychologist down to the shooting range for a couple of hours every week for the next year?
But then what's the difference of that and just a police officer that's trained in psychology?
I don't know. I think that there's this idea that the whole bushel of apples is rotten in some sense, and so you need to throw the whole thing out. But I don't think we're good enough at building up institutions to have any idea about how to set up a functional peace department or police department or whatever. We don't know how to do it.
I mean, I kind of agree with the whole, I mean, I don't know about agree, but I do definitely understand the whole reallocating of police funds. And I do understand the need to further train and stress importance on other factors than just physical escalation or de-escalation. But I still think it should be the role of the police.
I hear you.
Even if you add programs to put them through more intense training, sure. That would also be more funding, not defunding. If you take out the police part, the actual enforcement part, then where's the incentive to follow the law?
I don't know, but another part of this conversation that, like, if I try to step outside of my own mind for a second, America has a serious problem with crime, yes, and with police violence, and with the incarceration rates, all of it together. We've got problems on all these different sides, all these different forces that we're having to contend with, and the tools that we've created to contend with them, the police and our prisons, et cetera. We've got these problems. And, you know, you need to take both sides of that into account. So we've got the problem with crime, definitely. But then what do we do with it? Are we just going to fill our prisons up more? Like the, you know, per capita, practically highest population, total highest population around the world, 23%. What's the number? 23% of the global incarcerated population in our country. You're just going to make that obscenity worse? Because
not everything has to end in crime. Like it has to end in prison time.
No,
especially like petty crimes. Like you can go through like rehabilitation programs. You can go through community service hours and things like that. Especially some vital work that needs to get done. If you can do that with community service hours, then that's fine. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, and there's probably some very easy things like drug laws. A lot of our drug laws could probably be rewritten and undone to change things for the better. I'm going to take us into a break though. We'll see how this works out. And frankly, I do see it as an experiment because that's ultimately how the rest of America is going to treat it. If they decide to go through it, if Minneapolis decides to disband its police department and create a peace department and other means for handling its crime, we're going to see how that works, and we're going to ideally learn from it. That's all that we can hope to do. I'm taking us into a break, though. We'll be joined by Peter Oliver when we come back. He is foreign correspondent, EU correspondent for RT International. We're going to be talking about these fires ongoing in Greece, Turkey, other countries in the Balkans. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Although heads up for our guest and our audience, Jamarl Thomas, who's the normal co-host of the show. He is not feeling up to it today. He's feeling under the weather. I think he has a flu, not COVID. We don't believe. Anyway, he's going to get tested later today, I believe. But he's at home. And for the meanwhile, it's me with the occasional assistance of producer Austin Pelly. On the line, we have Peter Oliver, EU correspondent for RT International. Now, recently, and this fits the theme, we've been speaking with Peter about various natural disasters or catastrophes, weather events. We're talking about flooding. We're talking about this massive chemical plant, massive disaster that happened a couple of weeks back near the city of Cologne. And today we're talking about fires, admittedly not in Germany. We're talking about fires taking place in Greece and Turkey that have added quite a bit of difficulty to countries already beset by financial problems and political problems. Anyway, on the other side of Europe, but nevertheless, we're continuing the theme. Peter Oliver joining us now. Peter, thank you for speaking with me. How are you doing this morning?
I'm very good, thanks. All good here. Glad, actually, looking at some of the pictures coming out of Greece and Turkey, that I'm not in those areas right now. It looks pretty grim, particularly in Greece at the moment. It does seem that, thankfully, heavy rains that came in over the weekend have not so much put out all of the fires in Turkey, but they've certainly allowed them to be managed better. Between the work of firefighters in Turkey and the weather, they've really they've taken the status down. I would say one thing: if you can hear a little dog in the background, that's because there's a little dog in the background, and he's waiting to go to the vets while I'm talking to you. So apologies for that. But no, back to the situation though in Greece is very bad. I don't know if any of your listeners have seen the footage of people being put onto ferries coming off the Greek island of Evia. It looks like something out of a disaster movie. It looks like it's been done with CGI. It hasn't, though. That's the thing, is that these people are being loaded onto ferries, being taken away to safety, but looking out at everything they've ever owned going up in flames. And the reason for that situation is the extreme heat wave that they've had in that area. We're looking at temperatures of around 113 degrees Fahrenheit. Most severe heat wave in 30 years. It's not just that it's been that hot, it's that it's been that hot for that long. And, it does get warm in that part of the world. But what it has been doing is it's been warm, and it's stayed warm for a while. And then the idea that there's been winds picking up as well. You've seen pictures from California with the wildfires there. It's the wind that causes the real issues. And from my own experience of reporting from wildfires, it was 11 years ago in Moscow, in the Moscow region. There's extreme wildfires there. And what was really bizarre about these situations is that it can seem like everything's done. It can seem like everything's out, and there's no visible fire, there's no smoke even. But then the wind whips up, and you find out that it's actually on fire. The ground's on fire under the ground. And that's the situation they've been seeing in not just in Greece, not just in Turkey, but also in Italy. There's problems with wildfires, and in Russia as well right now, in Siberia. Huge issues with wildfires there. It does seem, certainly between the floods, between the fires, that we are seeing more and more of these events, and the authorities from Greece are saying, without a shadow of a doubt, as far as they're concerned, this is down to man-made climate change and the impact of that. The fact that I said is that it's not so much the heat, it's the length of time that they're being subjected to that level of heat. And when it was with the floods in Germany, it wasn't so much that it rained, it was the intensity of rain for so long. Now, Greece isn't the wealthiest country in the European Union. It has serious debt problems, and they've been appealing for help to other member states and to other nations as well. And what we know is that firefighters from Germany, from France, and from the United Kingdom as well are already on the scene there in Greece. This is all happening not far away from the capital, from Athens itself. In fact, 2 fire fronts, as they're described as, destroyed thousands of acres of land just to the north and east of the capital city of Athens. Those fires seem to be under control. As I said, they're not saying that they're out, they're not saying it's safe, but they're being controlled at the moment thanks to the work of firefighters who've been dropping water bombs from helicopters and from airplanes as well. Huge amounts of water that have been dropped on those areas. It is a bad situation that is something that, well, we are going to have to, it would seem, live with and get better equipped to deal with, because we are seeing these fires more and more. Now, I know I said this is the worst fires in 30 years, but I was in Greece a lot during the debt crisis following the Euro crisis in 2010, 2012, 2013. And there were fires there. They were dealing with them on a regular basis. But this year, it has been much worse. And it's overwhelming the authorities' ability to deal with it. In Turkey, they're also in a similar situation whereby, you're looking at hundreds of houses that have been destroyed. Official figures there say 8 people were killed in these fires. And, you're looking at thousands of people that have had to leave, as I said, everything behind and everything that's being destroyed. And these crises, these disasters, they come with more than just the immediate consequences. It's more than just it's a fire, it's dangerous, there's a risk to life. People aren't getting insurance in these areas in the future. So even if you haven't lost everything, even if you did have insurance to claim that back, you're probably not getting insurance in the future. And even if you didn't lose everything and you haven't made it a claim, but you live in a nearby area, good luck getting insurance in the future. So these are the real tangible effects, it would seem, of our impact on the climate, and especially with the UN report that's just come out this morning. I haven't had a chance to read through that just yet, but
I was just going to get into that, Peter. That's the thing to bring up.
Eye-opening material, yeah.
Yeah, how's that being received politically? What do you see? Because that's all over the news this morning. It's a big. I myself have said, and in fact just did in the headlines about it, that it's one of the most decisive reports. It's one of their largest and sort of most authoritative reports. That's where I was coming from. I'm not trying to implant that idea into you, but nevertheless, how is that being received politically? How are you?
Just based on what I know from listening to the news for this morning from both the UK and from Germany, where I'm based, it's been received, as you said, like this is very much a decisive report of we have to make changes, and how those changes are going to be made. Well, certainly in Germany we have, the politicians have to come up with plans and have to come up with them quick, because the election is next month, the 23rd of September, and with climate certainly playing a big role, and the Green Party picking up a lot more votes than they have in many, many years here in Germany. They're certainly set to pick up a lot more, be a lot larger represented in the Bundestag following September's election. This is going to play a big role, because people are looking to these politicians, and it's not just who's going to be taking over from Angela Merkel. It's what are you going to do in the next 4 years? Because we're being told we need to act now. So what plans do you have to act now? I think some of them are going to be found sorely wanting, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in those pre-election debates here in Germany.
Interesting. Peter, one last quick question. This is admittedly a hard pivot onto another topic, but in terms of the COVID situation in Berlin, right now, just mask mandates were recently reintroduced for both vaccinated and unvaccinated in D.C. This follows, CDC guidance across the United States as a whole. A lot of cities are moving back into that phase. Things are not locked down by any means, but we're getting back into that mode. And whether we'll get that far or not, that's how we're handling it on this side of the Atlantic. What's the situation over in Europe, specifically in Germany, like, and more specifically in Berlin? What's the government's COVID response there? I was hearing about protests. I saw a note from you last week that there were some protests against this that were handled rather brutally by local police. What have you been seeing just briefly as we close?
Well, I've actually just arrived back from Paris, where I was dealing with protests about this issue there and how they're dealing with it there. And while we don't have protests on the scale of that they had in France, where I think there was around 230,000 people across the whole country out on the streets on Saturday, I went with one march through centre of Paris, where what they're unhappy about is what is essentially going to be happening all across Europe, where this digital COVID pass is going to be your passport to freedom, really. It's a QR code that you have on your phone, or you can have the printed version. I got mine last week. I used it to travel to France. It made everything a lot easier. They scan it at the airport or wherever you are, and it shows your name, your details, what vaccine you've had. Are you vaccinated? What vaccine you've had, and the results of any tests that you've taken. That is now law in France and in Italy, that you have to show that. Here in Germany, it isn't the law yet. However, on Wednesday, I believe, I'm pulling that off the top of my head, but I think it's definitely this week. I think it's Wednesday. There will be a meeting of Angela Merkel, her cabinet, her coalition partners, and the leaders of all of the 16 states of Germany, whereby we're expecting to hear that they will put forward this COVID health pass as the passport to enter quite a lot of things. Now, I say quite a lot of things, and I'm very much not specific there because we don't know what. What I can tell you is that in France, you need it now to enter, or from this week, you'll need it to enter cafes, restaurants, bars, theatres, cinemas, museums. Also, you're going to need it for long distance travel, and even to go to some medical centres that you will need to show that you have been vaccinated, or that you can prove with this pass that you've had tests carried out and that you're not positive for COVID. The idea that was being put forward was a 3G idea here in Berlin. It was called, that you were geimpft, getestet oder genesen. So you were either vaccinated, tested, or you had recovered, and this pass would have to show that. Now, what had been put forward by Jens Spahn, the health minister here, was you showed this to get in just about everywhere. I would imagine it would be watered down somewhat. I do expect, though, that by the end of this week, we'll know that it is a COVID pass that is the future. I can tell you in terms of the vaccination rollouts, they're still vaccinating around 5% of the population every 2 weeks. It end up being fully vaccinated. It's currently around 55% of German population. New moves to try and get young people vaccinated. In fact, this evening, I'm going to a COVID club. I'm 38 years old. I think it's the first time I'll have set foot in a nightclub since I was about 25. But I'm going to a nightclub tonight where they're going to be giving out vaccines to people between over the age of 16. You'll be able to get a jab. If you're under the age of 18, you have to have written permission from a parent or guardian. But yeah, they'll be giving out vaccinations there to try and encourage more young people to take up the COVID vaccine. So
at a nightclub, trying to entice people to come out. That is truly bizarre.
They're going to say you can because already we are seeing this COVID pass would be necessary to enter Berlin's nightlife. Berlin is quite renowned for its nightclubs. So they've got the clubs involved, they've got the vaccine manufacturers involved, some DJs involved. I would love to be able to tell you who's playing, but I wouldn't know them if they were stood next to me. So I'm going to go there and stand out like a sore thumb. It's like, hey, how about this, young people? Hello, fellow kids. Isn't that the meme? But yeah, so,
exactly, with your skateboard and your baseball cap on backwards. Exactly. I know.
Yes.
I know.
So that's the situation at the moment. Is there is a lot of take up still for the vaccine. There is a small but vocal minority who are very much against everything like that. In France, they, just to fill in on what we were doing over the weekend while we were there, people aren't happy about this COVID pass. 60% or more of the population, though, they are on side with it. And I think that was pretty evident from the protest that I was at on Saturday. Those that are against it, there's not going to be any changing that hardcore nucleus of the population's mind. And that's where the big task's going to lie. Because last month, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, he said, everybody needs to get a vaccine. You've got to get one done. No ifs, no buts, no maybes. Get your jab. Now, while that was seen by some people as like, well, how dare you tell us what to do? For a lot of people, they went out and got their jab because it's clear that you are going to need it in order to move around France. I think it comes in from today. In fact, the extensions to the health pass.
Yes, yeah.
So a lot of people did go, and I think it jumped by around 1 million a day in terms of people who were getting their jabs after what Macron said. But how they are going to win over people who have already made their mind up that they're not getting the jab, that they're not going to use the health pass, that they're not going to wear masks, that's where the real task's going to lie. Because
that's
it's
the difficulty. Absolutely. Peter, I'm going to close. Yeah. And I know that like you said, you got to get to the vet. Thank you for joining us. Hope everything works out with the pup. And good talking with you.
Oh, he's fine. It's just a little injury. He's got to get a little vaccine himself.
Okay. All right. Talk later, Peter.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us. Peter Oliver, for those listening, the EU correspondent for RT International, providing daily coverage of political, diplomatic, and economic news from across the European Union. Follow him on Twitter at PeterG_Oliver_RT and catch his reporting weekly on RT International. We're just speaking with Peter Oliver, a fan of dogs, I hear. We're going to be speaking with Mark Frost, a fan of cats, notoriously. We've had multiple conversations about this with him on the show. He's an entrepreneur, a capitalist. Really, we speak with him as a professor and an economist, and sometimes as a businessman, but also as a longtime friend of the show. Mark Frost, when we come back, you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda. But we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Although, again, quick heads up for both our guest and the audience. Jamarl Thomas, normal host and co-host of this show, he is still feeling under the weather after starting to take some sick time off last Thursday. We were hoping to have him back today, but he's just wanted to rest some more, as of course is best for him right now. Maybe we'll hear from him tomorrow, maybe the next day. Nevertheless, he's starting to be on the mend, I hear. So sooner than later, I think. Without further ado, though, I'm joined on the line by Mark Frost. He's an economist, professor, consultant, drummer, Eagle Scout, Marine, capitalist, Schumpeterian, and recovering libertarian. Mark, thank you for joining me this morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing quite well. I see that we have multiple guests on your show that are taking animals to the vet later. So
I just saw your note on that. So well, first of all, who's going in, and are they okay?
Yeah, they're fine. It's just a routine sort of checkup. I have a new cat. I have a second cat now. So I had Schumpe named after Joseph Schumpeter, and I got a new cat about 3 weeks ago that had a wonderful story attached to it. He was a shutdown cat. So, during the shutdown, people went and got dogs and cats. And then after they grew up into, from puppies and kittens to, dogs and cats, then they didn't want them anymore, so they abandoned them. So I'm both writing an academic paper on this, and I adopted a cat that fit all the criteria of a shutdown cat. And so his name is Milton, after Milton Friedman.
The intellectual influence naming pattern continues here, and I'm sure it will go on to become, ingenious leaders in their own fields, respectively. I'm sure. Mark, that's awesome, and I'm sad to hear that thing happens. That's the kind of thing that happens in general, and that usually pet owners are warned against. It's like, hey, don't adopt this pet, don't bring this pet in, if you can't take care of them, or if you're just going to drop out as soon as they grow up a little bit, because it's one thing to be in love with a puppy or a kitten, but of course you need to stick with them because they are creatures with their own consciousnesses too, and
yes, absolutely,
and often very lovable ones at that.
Even in the cat rescue things that I do, we've changed some of our policies to better underwrite, so to speak, the adoption agreements that we make. So we're a little pickier now who we adopt a cat out to, because we're not a pet store. We're the Humane Society.
Yeah.
We want to match the right cat with the right, family, so we don't have these problems down the road.
That makes sense. I can see there's an interesting kind of room for that. And in the same way that actuaries, measure micromorts or whatever, trying to figure out the risk of people doing this or that action. It's like, what is the, you are using that as an insurance company to be like, okay, what's the risk of this person? What is, what's the longevity? How likely is this person to, to suffer injuries, that kind of thing. But with people and pets, and whether or not they're going to be good friends and quote unquote owners or whatever to their animal companions. Interesting idea. That's not what I wanted to talk about, though. I'm going to pivot here. You sent an article a couple of days ago. This is from the Wall Street Journal. The title of it is "The Electric Vehicle Welfare State," where basically, and you're talking about car makers who are backing this, the Biden push to stimulate electric vehicle spending and innovation. And Tesla, of course, has been leading the way on this, and other car companies are starting to match suit. And Europe has various goals in different countries and across the bloc, both on climate change generally and on electric vehicles specifically, moving over to an entirely electric vehicle force. It seems like we're matching that here in the U.S., and we have our own ambitious plans trying to move over entirely within the next couple of decades, and a lot of companies are following suit. So it seems to be working. But I think you might have taken issue. I'm curious to hear your take on this policy in general, like specific subsidies, specific programs, government injecting money or tax savings or infusions of cash, whatever it looks like, into industries that they want to grow. What's your take on this?
Well, yeah, I have the in some circles unpopular belief that what the world is moving to right now is a fascist economic model, not a communist or even a capitalist one. Fascism doesn't necessarily mean German fascism or World War II fascism, but the literal meaning of the word in economics, which is it's an in-between. It's neither capitalism nor is it communism. But the goal is nevertheless the welfare of the state. Just like in communism, the goal is the welfare of the people, so whoever represents the people or whoever represents the state, what's good for them is good, for that. So in a fascist economic system, you can still have private property, but the state demands that private property be used for the welfare of the people, that is the state. And so my problem with these things is that, in my view, when it comes to business, government's role should be primarily around policing criminals, stopping companies that defraud consumers, things like that. But this has gone the Albert Speer, route, where government is actually not just going in and saying, we want to promote electric vehicles for a general welfare purpose of, maybe we think this would be a way to combat climate change, whether you believe that government should be doing that or not. This isn't just that. The Biden administration has said, for instance, Tesla was not invited to any of this because they're non-union. So Tesla has been hasn't been consulted or even dealt with in any of this, and the plans for subsidies and the plans for government involvement is around subsidizing electric car companies that are union shops, which is the very definition of an economic fascist model. You're not just using the police power of the state to stop criminal activity. You're using the police power of the state to purposely choose winners and losers. And
yes.
Objection
yes.
violates the remaining libertarianism that resides in me.
Wait, what did you say that does with the remaining libertarianism that resides in you? Does it rub up against it or something? The remaining libertarianism in you does not like it, basically, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of residual libertarianism in me. No, make no mistake.
I hear you. No, but there's some of that. There's some more fundamental differences. But I hear. But isn't that, in some sense, necessary? Might be too strong a word. But isn't that in some sense proportional to what we see coming from China? Isn't so?
Yes.
And if I will make a request here, I understand exactly what you mean by fascism, but I simply see it as like a command and control economy or economic authoritarianism or something. Fascism for me, like we said in the last time we talked about this, it gets into this whole ideological conversation that has been done to death so many times about communism, fascism, socialism, liberalism, etc. These competing capitalisms, these competing isms that sort of define the 20th century. But it seems like we're moving into a union of all of them, which whether you call it whether you call it fascism or something else, it is what it is, what it is. And that's what China's been drifting towards, arguably, totally, is the union of the state and corporate enterprise with a directed corporate sector, with a market economy that is nevertheless controlled by the state, and the state says it serves the people. That's what China is functionally. So I can agree with that much. But my point is, in the same way that China says that they're doing socialism with Chinese characteristics, I've had this idea that at some point soon, we might start to copy China and say we're doing capitalism with American characteristics, but it looks a lot more like what China's doing. In other words, without actually saying that we're imitating them, we will, in order to direct our economy, in order to imitate what they're doing and try to compete with them and beat them out, we're going to do what they do, which is control our economy, try to direct what companies are able to do, that kind of thing. What you're talking about here, isn't that necessary, in other words? Isn't that just incentivized in the nature of competition? Mark, what's your take on that?
No, it's not necessary at all. And I would argue that history teaches us it does more damage than it does good. I do agree, and I've been saying this on the show, actually, I think for at least 18 months, probably since I've been on this show, at least maybe even a couple years, that China really isn't a communist country anymore. The best word to describe China's political economy system is fascist. They're very nationalist, and they have private property. They have a stock market, so they have elements of capitalism, but they don't really like capitalism, and they hold on to their communist sentiments. What China reminds me of is, I don't know if you studied Gregor Strasser at all.
No.
He was sort of Hitler's, in the early 30s, he was Hitler's sort of right-hand man, and then he got as popular as Hitler was, and he was killed in the Night of the Long Knives. But he has a great quote that I think is just so representative of how a lot of people think today. And the quote is by Gregor Strasser is, "We are socialists. We are enemies, deadly enemies of today's capitalist economic system with its exploitation of the economically weak, its unfair wage system, its immoral way of judging the worth of human beings in terms of their wealth and their money instead of their responsibility and their performance. And we are determined to destroy this system, whatever happens." That is a profound statement that he said, I believe it was in 1930, early 30s, I believe, maybe mid-30s. And that is representative of, I believe, the Chinese Communist Party's view. And to put it in historical perspective, think of Gregor Strasser as a left-leaning fascist and Hitler as a right-leaning fascist, if that makes any sense to you at all. I'm not sure it does to me, but from a language perspective, it does somewhat, sort of showcase why the two men like.
I hear you. No, I guess my take on the whole fascism thing is I've just sort of come to progressively turn my back on the codifications used by the 20th century analysts or whatever, this ideology war thing. I don't think that applies as much anymore. But I hear what you're saying. Partly just because it's almost like the scholastics in the 17th century or something. There was this overly convoluted conversation happening behind the scenes in the Catholic Church, in my opinion, overly convoluted, about what's true. And, it was how many angels dance on the head of a pin, that kind of thing, where it's just overly involved. And I'm not saying it's that level with these conversations, but there's something similar about it. Like, I don't care what we call it. I just care about, how the thing we're describing works. And sometimes, using the term fascism, people will quibble with it because they understand it in a different way, and it just becomes a semantic misunderstanding. I'm going to take us into a brief break, though, because the fundamental question, I don't know if it's necessary, I agree with you, but I do think it is quite useful for the United States in some cases to direct market activity. Now, you might say it's not useful in the long run, but like Keynes said, in the long run, everybody's dead. And I know I'm not, I'm using the phrase in the way that exact way he used it, but in the long run, a lot of things can happen. In the short run, if you can direct market activity and see tangible results that are better compared to the alternative, then isn't it in your best interest to do it? We've got to come back on that, but I'm giving you a heads up that that's where we're going, Mark. I'm joined on the line by Mark Frost, economist, professor, and recovering libertarian, many other things as well. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, coming back with Mark on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Although, again, Jamarl Thomas, normal host, co-host of the show, is out sick right now. He's feeling under the weather. He has the flu or something like it. We don't think it's COVID-19, just based on the symptoms so far. But he's getting tested later, and we hope he'll be back within the next day or so. For now. And in the meanwhile, for this segment, I'm joined by Mark Frost, economist, professor, consultant, drummer, Eagle Scout, Marine, capitalist, Schumpeterian, and recovering libertarian. Mark, I gloss over a lot of the stuff in the middle of that biography, short paragraph, really, not biography. My dad used to talk with you about being a drummer. I started to talk with you about that, but I never really was a drummer. My dad was, and you are. You're a competent one, and I will wager a more competent one than my dad. You've got the kit, certainly, but you and he would talk about that sometimes. But I've turned away from that. I think we talked about Rush briefly. You're also an Eagle Scout, former Marine, all this stuff. We'll get into it at some point, but I want to continue this conversation. Isn't there a case to be made that in the short run, directing economic activity, large investments of cash, infusions of cash into specific economic sectors, if you're trying to decide this is an older conversation, clearly, if you're trying to decide where your country is going, what industries it wants to promote, there's a space for the market sector, but maybe the bootstrapping that you would expect to see in some new industry isn't quite enough. And by throwing cash directly into it for R&D purposes or to create some very competent institution that turns into a company, directed activity, that kind of leadership, that can make a lot of things happen that wouldn't otherwise happen, can't it? I mean, the Manhattan Project, admittedly problematic in terms of what it actually led to in nuclear weaponry and things. But I bring it up simply to say, here's an institution directed by people, directed by the government, that was supposed to accomplish something and accomplished that, and created a lot more than just nuclear weaponry in terms of functionally working for something. The government can do those kinds of things. It's not impossible. It's just a little bit difficult to set up. But if you can set that up, couldn't you make your country the economic leader of the world around in like robotics or semiconductors? Or couldn't we make ourselves couldn't we sharpen ourselves into a real tool, a machine that we haven't seen before, Mark? And if we could, and you can disagree with whether we could or not, why shouldn't we? What's your take?
The answer is no, we can't. In the short term, stealing always benefits the thief. And if you look at the history of innovation, I mean, if you just read Schumpeter's History of Economic Analysis, or you read the Theory of Economic Development, even modern history, what we see is we really don't need to do that. Now, if we want to wage war, there's not a lot of free market innovation going on trying to sell nuclear bombs to individuals. There's not a giant market for that. So government, if we want nuclear bombs to protect ourselves with, to deter aggression, then government has to be involved, not just in the financing of that, but it has to be involved in the innovation of it and the control of it, obviously. So there are certain things that aren't conducive to the free market, but they're very, very rare. And there's plenty of capital, there's plenty of innovation. Tesla didn't need government to come in and force them to do anything.
Oh, no, but although they depended on subsidies pretty heavily.
Sorry, what?
Although they depended on subsidies pretty heavily, Tesla.
Would have happened anyway without the subsidies, because go talk to any Tesla owner. Rarely, when I had my Tesla, I didn't buy it because I got a subsidy. I bought it because I thought it was cool. And he's solving the problem that electric cars had, which is you buy one and you can't drive it very many places because it's hard and costly in both time and, time is money, and it's costly to go get it charged back up. And he's solving that problem, and that's done by an innovative type of a situation. Going back to your quote about Keynes, in the long run, we're all dead. Keynes agreed after the war that we should go back to the classical medicine. When he said in the long run we're all dead, he obviously didn't mean literally we're all dead. He said that the time that it takes to go back to general equilibrium from a full-blown disequilibrium, a complete disruption of a business cycle, might be a generation. And it can be exceptionally painful in terms of blood, sweat, and tears for a particular class of people before that price system re-equilibrates. So that's what he was talking about there. But Keynes himself would not be a Keynesian today. He certainly would not be a post-Keynesian, because Keynes was a classical economist. He just believed that if nobody was buying anything, government should step in, or some big institutional player, and start buying stuff to reprime the pump, so to speak. But, Keynes is misquoted quite often on that, a lot like, very much like Joseph Schumpeter is misquoted on his theory of the entrepreneur and his coinage of creative destruction. A great example, I think, of what I think the best argument for what you, for your thesis earlier, is that we should do it because China's doing it. Whether it's good or bad, if China's going to subsidize its semiconductor industry, how can our semiconductor industry
compete? That's there's a version of that claim, but also just seeing not just competition, but also taking it as a kind of evidence. In other words, not just, okay, well, if they're cutting off their thumb, then I'm going to cut mine off too. Not just blind imitation, but also, okay, we've seen what they're doing. It seems to have worked for them. They have an edge in these fields now. Let's compete with them. We got to close it, but briefly, why doesn't that work, Mark? What's your problem with that?
In China has some very severe negatives in their economic outlook. Of course, they're going to do well when they went basically from poverty into a manufacturing nation, but they're suffering massive inflation. By American standards, every one of their banks are on the verge of default. They have some severe structural problems within their economy.
That's what we're saying now, but I also know that we've been saying that for a while, and it seems we'll see what happens. Like so many things, you've been right. I'm going to give you credit. You've been right about a lot, Mark. So I'm not saying that you're wrong on this one. I'm saying I don't know, and we'll see exactly what happens. But something I've been curious to see, and we've got to close this out. I'm curious if China succeeds, we stop talking about how their version of of, criticizing them when it doesn't work and saying it's because they're deviating from capitalism, well, that messaging just sort of dies out. And instead, we just sort of do what they do. We might criticize them on the margins, but we do imitate them. And I think that might be coming. Nevertheless, we've got to close it out. Mark Frost, entrepreneur, professor, economist. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be back in a minute with headlines and the last hour of this morning show.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for the last hour this morning of the most disruptive show. Covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states we call America and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the Independent Corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan. And in the other independent, I would say the right corner.
Oh, definitely right.
Right now, we've got your producer for Fault Lines, temporary interim political analyst, Austin Pelly. He is standing in, of course, for the indefatigable, the ever-present, although this time in spirit, not body, Jamarl Thomas, who is sadly sick right now. Usual progressive political analyst and co-host of the show. He is sick at home with the flu, I'm sad to say. So, Austin, producer for the show, sitting in, at least for this headline segment. Together, we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And now, unlike the last 2 hours, and because it's just me, I'm going to hand it off to Austin. He's going to do headlines, and I'm going to go and use the bathroom. I'll be right back.
All right. Starting off with COVID news. About 36,068 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, and there were about 131 new deaths, following a very high 168,343 new cases on Friday. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 110,360 cases per day, an increase of 112% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 50% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 58% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected about 35,812,164 people across the United States and killed 616,594 people. Starting today, people in France will now have to show a health pass in order to enter bars, cafes, restaurants, and long-distance trains. This extends a current requirement that those attending concerts, cinemas, and museums must use the health pass. In July, Emmanuel Macron announced that healthcare workers would have to be vaccinated by September 15th, or they would be banned from work and not paid. It's a very interesting conversation on this one. I know that I myself have a personal friend who is a healthcare worker but can't get the vaccine for various reasons. They just don't work, and it's super dangerous for her too. So I'm sure other people are in that position as well. In national news, Melissa DeRosa, secretary to Governor Andrew Cuomo, has resigned amid the investigation of sexual assault against Cuomo. In the allegations, DeRosa has been accused of taking part in the quote-unquote retaliation against his accusers. In the accusation made by Lindsey Boylan, DeRosa was said to consistently scream at staff for illogical things and released Boylan's confidential information to the public after she came out with her story of assault. The Senate is reportedly moving closer to passing the infrastructure bill after a vote last night to end debate, and another vote to pass the bill is due to come tomorrow. Democrats are also reportedly looking to move forward with another package of, quote, soft, quote, unquote, and unquote, infrastructure they're looking to pass using budget reconciliation. The Minneapolis City Council is revisiting the total disbandment of police department in an upcoming vote. The officers would be replaced with a, quote, comprehensive public health approach, end quote, and, quote, licensed peace officers if necessary, end quote. The movement would also put the new department not directly under the power of the mayor's office. Activist groups have raised more than $1 million and collected over 20,000 signatures, double what is needed for this to move on and to be put on the ballot. In international news, heavy clashes have broken out in northern Afghanistan as the Taliban continues its offensive, taking 5 provincial capitals from government forces in just the last handful of days. This assault comes ahead of the planned withdrawal by the United States this September 11th, just over a month away. Officials in Mali say that more than 40 civilians and 12 troops were killed by Islamic militias in northern Mali and nearby in Burkina Faso. The president of Burkina Faso said on Twitter that his country continues to wage without concession the war the obscurantist and barbaric forces have imposed on our country, end quote. A man was shot dead in Lebanon while arguing at a petrol station, that's gas for us Americans, with the fight escalating from using fists to knives and eventually gun. This is the latest high-profile crime in a situation of increasing economic desperation. In Olympic news, the, quote, most challenging Olympic journey, end quote, has been officially declared closed by the IOC chief yesterday. The final results of the games put Russian athletes at 5th with 71 medals, 20 of them gold, Great Britain 4th with 65 medals, 22 gold, Japan in 3rd with 58 medals, 27 of them gold, which is a record high for that country, China with 88 medals and 38 gold, and the number one, the one, the only, the US of A, baby, with 113 medals and 39 of them gold. In the last day of the games, the U.S. won gold in volleyball, track cycling, and basketball to push them one gold above China and win in both gold and overall medal counts. In Earth and Science news, in its most definitive report on the subject yet, the United Nations has decided unequivocally, that mankind is to blame for the accelerated pace of global warming, warning that every region on Earth will become increasingly likely to experience extreme weather disruption. I am still positive there is a fringe group that will still fight that and disagree. And the Dixie Fire has become the second largest fire in California history. The blaze has already spread across 4 counties, burning an area larger than New York City. Only 21% of the fire has been labeled as contained, and 4 firefighters have already been sent to the hospital. And one more in business news. Samuel Reed, CEO and founder of Geometric Energy Corporation, is partnering with SpaceX to launch an advertisement satellite to display billboard ads in space. The satellite will have a massive screen on one side, providing prime advertising space for companies' marketing teams. The ad space will be bidded on, so you can get it as low as $1 or as high as however we'll allow you to. They will be bidded on for the rights of use, and cryptocurrency will be necessary to purchase the display. Those are your fault lines. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with the ever-present, not so today, Thomas and Stranahan here, and Ellie.
And there we go. Thank you for that, Austin. Appreciate it. That bought me some very necessary time there. I really, really appreciate it. That last one is kind of interesting, and I don't know that it's going to work. They're trying to put up billboards in space.
What do you mean it's totally going to work?
But think about it. That has to be a massive billboard for you to see it from land.
Well, I don't think it's going to be like you could see it with the naked eye, but I think you can see it with a pretty decent telescope.
I've got to pull out a telescope just to look at an advertisement.
You never got a telescope as a kid?
Well, I'm sure, but I would hope I have better things to look at than a billboard with it.
Are you kidding? The night sky, it's completely clear. And you see stars, the moon, and Coca-Cola.
Exactly. That's the thing. You're watching the moon, and they have the flight paths picked out so that every 15 minutes, a little Coke billboard just passes over the moon.
I think that'd be awesome.
It
is kind of sad that the majority of the public doesn't really have access to space yet. But we do put ads, but we can put ads up there.
You can put ads up there. Yeah.
So, I mean, that is sad. In all reality, it's sad. But
no, and the light pollution, it just sounds brutal all around, man. I'm going to be honest. I don't like the sound of it particularly.
Well, is that really light pollution? Isn't that from the Earth side?
Well, you'd hope. I don't know. There are so many ways that this could go. And then they could also be advertising to people in space. They could just be really who the people on the ISS are. So, if you think about it, it's extremely targeted marketing.
Well, I mean, they're targeting to humanity, the Earth.
Well, with that one, for sure. No, for sure. I'm talking about advertising to the astronauts. There are only a dozen of them or a couple of dozen of them.
Why do you need to advertise to the astronauts?
I don't know.
At that point, it's way more expensive to put the ad out than the business you get in.
There's maybe something true about that. I don't know. I don't think the billboards are the way we should be filling our atmosphere.
Oh, yeah, we already have an abundance of satellites up there.
We have a lot of satellites up there. I think we need to clean up some of that first. There are all these different ways I could be critical of it. But I don't know. And then maybe I guess the one positive take is just, hey, we're in space more, and isn't that a good thing in some sense? You know?
I mean, that's kind of grasping at straws.
It is kind of grasping at straws. It's kind of stretching, isn't
what
it?
I thought of is like when you drive by like a Chipotle and one of the letters are out and it just says Chipotle. And then, so what happens if one of the letters goes out in space? You're going to send a technician up?
I guess so.
You're going to bring the satellite down?
I don't know.
For re-entry?
No, yeah, how do you do that? You have an astronaut out there like moving one of the letters into the middle of the sign.
Or is it going to be like an ISS mission, like Coca-Cola needs you to fix their third seat or the second seat?
Yeah, Elon Musk, get him on the line. No, that's silly. I saw you added that in, but I guess there's something serious here, which is, hey, if we're going into space, I guess the more the merrier. The more initiatives you have going on simultaneously, it's more opportunities to learn. It's more stuff going on. But overall, I'm net critical of this one. I don't like this.
But do you know how electric it would be to see a Dogecoin floating right at the moon?
Well, okay, so wait, I want to pause on this for a second, actually, because cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin slumped pretty significantly there. Cryptocurrencies across the board did kind of crappily for a little while. And then like Elon Musk faltered. He was pro Bitcoin for a while. Then he like bailed on Bitcoin. Then he like went full in on Doge, it seemed. And everybody saw Elon Musk as the Doge savior. Dogecoin is one of these cryptocurrencies. I can't even technically say what kind of coin it is, a crap coin. It's one of these coins that's known to not be that valuable, but it's been like shooting up in value. It's been a sound investment. Right?
I mean, you're in it for the long haul.
Is this a debate between you and Andre right now?
No, Andre makes some crazy bids.
Does he?
And he's going to talk in my ear and defend that. But yeah, he's a little aggressive with his crypto trading, but hey, to each his own. At this point, Bitcoin seemed like the new AMC and GameStop stock.
Yeah.
That's what it seemed like. And for both of those, if you got in literally 2 days, you could make hundreds of thousands. Like you could they were get rich quick schemes, apparently. But also you would lose a lot of money if you got in too late. So Bitcoin seemed like the next one, which is why it got so popular. It was a meme coin. It was easy to follow it with like the Reddit and Twitter trends and all that. And then Elon Musk is promoting it. But then people started to realize, oh, it's acting more like an actual stock now. It's acting more like actual cryptocurrency. And yeah, it shoots up and it dips down. But at this point, you're either in it for, I'm going to say at least a year, or you're not in it.
Yeah.
And you just cut your losses.
Yeah.
I'm in it. To the moon.
Well, but the dynamic here, and it's hard to get into your head if you haven't been through one of these. And admittedly, I don't think I actually have, but I've like imagined it many times. Is like, okay, if you think that this thing is going to go through the roof, say Dogecoin, which last I checked was worth like 25 cents per or something like that, and people think it's going to go to $1 or $10. Say you think it's going to go to $10. That's 40 times the worth right now. That's a 40x increase. And say you think it's going to be there in a couple of years. You can't get anything like that on any clean stock market. You pick the riskiest index fund or whatever. My point is, you're making a very specific call. It's gambling. And the logic internally is, do I want to put $1 on that? Do I want to put $1,000 into that investment? Do I want to put all of my savings into that investment? Because the more money I put into it, of course, the more money is going to get 40x'd. And that's the dynamic.
Well,
so that's what drives people to put everything.
Don't put in what you can't lose, because you are gambling at that point.
Yeah, but what can you lose your savings? Say a 30-year-old, and this is not, I'm 28, I'm not speaking from personal experience here, but say a 30-year-old, can you afford to lose all of your savings at 80K, baby? It's going to be going to the moon. I'm going to buy Lambos for days.
Well, it depends. Are you willing to be broke and food stamps in the current to possibly have a rich future?
In the 5% of universes where you make it big, is it worth the 95% where you fail completely and lose your savings?
No, I'd rather play it safe. But I mean, I haven't not like a lot, but I have enough that I'm comfortable with, and it would be like, oh great, if I pull out and it goes to $1, that'd be awesome. But if not, then man, I'll learn for the next one.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the way that I'm treating it.
Complete detour here, but we hit crypto after following up on Elon Musk and SpaceX, and really billboards. This is how we started talking about billboards in space. On the fire business, I was looking at the Dixie Fire. This is much further north of the fires that I was in last year, and I will never live down the fact that I was like right near. Within a day, if my aunts and I had stayed camping, we would have been trapped. We would have had to be air evacuated, out from this like lake that was the site of a fire, massive fire burning in the area.
In the lake?
What do you say?
Can't you go in the lake?
You can go in the lake, but then, and so people were like crowding on the shores of the lake, getting, air evac while the entire forest around them was on fire, basically. So it could have happened. It would have been a story. It would have been good radio, especially if I'm calling in while I'm on the.
Could win a Pulitzer for that one.
I could. I don't know that they'd ever give it to me, but it'd be worth it for sure. I'd be taking pictures with my iPhone. Anyway, I grew up camping here, and my uncle, firefighter, we'd have conversations going camping around this stuff. And so periodically, I will do these sort of like public service announcement, PSA style warnings about forest fires. Not like, don't, I'm not Smokey the Bear. It's not like that, but it's about the actual causes. A couple of things. Has to do with improper forest management, which is the most bland sounding thing. But basically, it means we're not lighting enough fires. We're not doing selective burns and creating like sort of checkered areas where the problem right now is if you have contiguous fire zones where you have a whole zone, it's like the whole, national park, for instance, of continuous forest, and one bit of it lights on fire. If you've got a lot of parts of it that haven't burned in a long time, it will just rip through the entire territory, the entire continuous territory. It'll spread like wildfire through the entire thing, of course. So what you need to do are controlled burns. If you combine the fact that California, whether due to, reckless conservation policies or not enough funding for, these kinds of services, you combine that with the fact that you have this beetle, this pine beetle, that has been ripping through and absolutely devastating them. We would go camping, and every year we'd go back up, and more of the trees would be dead. You'd turn corners, and you'd be driving up into the mountains, and you'd turn a corner, and a view that had been beautiful and green and plush, like half of it would just be brown and brittle trees that had been dried out, that were basically dead standing, just wood to burn, killed by these pine beetles that swept through, this invasive insect species that'll run through in waves and knock out entire forests. Anyway, you combine those factors, and what you're left with are like large, vast, standing tracts of firewood that can just light up like that. And so you get the Dixie Fire, you get situations like this. You combine that with high temperatures and drought, and you get these major fires. And it's a lot of it is due to, arguably all of it, you can chalk it up to human mismanagement, not managing your resources properly, not knowing how to take care of it.
Well, I don't know about that.
I would combine that. If you combine that in some sense with global warming and we're causing this stuff, literally all of it is we let this stuff grow.
Did we bring the beetles in?
Well, we certainly haven't. What made the beetles possible is you have all of these areas that we've prevented from burning for decades. Because the beetles couldn't come through it if you had more diverse species and you had younger plants, younger trees, and more kinds of trees.
So now the preservation is what's causing the destruction.
Yes, the preservation backfired. And it means that you have huge areas just burning through like crazy.
So you want it to catch fire every 10 years?
No,
so that
not
way
every
it's not
10
as
years.
bad every 20?
But yeah, something like that. You need to do controlled burns. You need to do somewhat regular controlled burns, especially in sort of interim areas, so that, and keep evacuation protocols in place. Make sure that you have evac services for populated centers. Make sure that people are aware that when they're moving there, this is an area that occasionally catches fire. Make sure you have insurance in your home. I mean, people already know that, of course. I'm not saying anything new here, but those are longstanding problems. That's my point that led to this. And I think with that, I'm going to take us into a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a minute. Be right back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. This is an open segment of the show today. We're taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Again, that's 202-521-1320. Phone lines are open right now. Talking about a couple of things this morning. COVID situation, as ever, is worsening. Well, maybe not as ever, but right now, we've been on this continuous upswing for the last couple of months. COVID's getting worse. Delta variant, we actually haven't hit this aspect of it this morning. This is the most controversial thing. The Delta variant breakthrough cases and whether or not vaccines actually work. That is a ripe topic for conversation. And it's one of those difficult battle lines that like is happening on Fox News and CNN somewhat. But I feel like the sides, as ever, are failing to make contact and really any meaningful progress on the actual core issues at hand or whatever. Could talk about that if you want to call in. I know a lot of folks are skeptical of the lockdowns. I like engaging folks who are skeptical of that, you know, on whatever ground. Also, Cuomo, big ongoing situation, of course. Chris Cuomo, governor of New York, on dangling by a thread politically, not doing well at all politically after the investigation that Attorney General Letitia James, New York Attorney General Letitia James, she kickstarted this investigation into claims that, you know, are coming out from people that he had been sexually harassing employees, staff, and people outside of the agency who was just, he was touching and making, you know, inappropriate comments. Anyway, there was word breaking about this a couple of months ago. Then it went kind of quiet because there was this investigation that Attorney General Letitia James put into place, started. She put two people in charge of it. They, mid last week, word came out, they had done this interview, described by some as an interrogation, but it's an 11-hour-long interview. That's where interrogation starts to feel appropriate. 11-hour-long interview with Andrew Cuomo. And apparently he got a little bit hostile. You can imagine they're a bit hostile. And that's an early hint that, hey, everything's not okay here. They're pursuing something.
I mean, not necessarily. If you hold someone in a room for 11 hours, then they're going to get hostile.
It's true. But even the fact that, I don't mean to, it's like begging the question, but even the fact that they're holding him in the room for 11 hours, it's a serious thing.
Well, that's an interrogation tactic.
Yes.
And it's a controversial one used by police because it's like, at what point have you just broken someone and they're like,
whatever, I'll say whatever you want me to say, whatever.
Let me go to sleep.
Exactly. No, but 11 hours isn't enough to inspire sleep deprivation, to induce sleep deprivation. The word breaks that he is kind of hostile and like June H. Kim is the name of one of the two people put in charge of this investigation. June H. Kim had previously handled interviews with Cuomo in 2014 over this anti-corruption probe that Cuomo shut down. There was this report that was going to be written up. Anyway, Cuomo successfully shut that probe down. Wasn't too big of a news story back in 2014, but June H. Kim, incidentally, was one of the people interviewing him back in the day. So he was on the opposite side from Cuomo with that. Cuomo brings that back up now, of course. That's a sign of hostility. Then the next day, on the same day, coincidentally, that Bill de Blasio, mayor of New York City, announces the Key to NYC pass. On that same day, you hear the results of the investigation are that Cuomo's committed multiple crimes on the federal and state level. And then over the weekend, we have Brittany Commisso, I believe is how you pronounce her name, Brittany Commisso, the executive assistant, former executive assistant, who went public, describes alleged misconduct, how he groped her and hugged her and kissed her without her consent, which is, of course, fitting completely with what we've heard of Cuomo previously. That's basically the state of play right there. And then this is all, that story, the Cuomo on his last leg story, there are three main tracks to that. We've only really been talking about one, at max two of them. There's the sexual harassment / sexual assault track of that story. Then there's the part of it where he hid the deaths of thousands of people, specifically old people, grandmothers and grandfathers. He hid their deaths. Basically, they'd been in nursing homes. He moved them to hospitals. Then some of them got moved back to nursing homes without having, fully recovered from COVID. Hid their deaths so that it didn't show as them having died in nursing homes. And he was able to basically lie and cover it up successfully to portray it as if they had died in hospitals instead. And then move them back without having fully recovered, in the process killing hundreds of thousands. There is an FBI investigation into that and into his cover-up of that. One of his aides back in the day, this was leaked earlier this year, that in a private meeting with Democratic lawmakers, she had said that Cuomo's administration froze, stopped in their tracks, out of what we can only assume is guilt or concern, at least, because there was this Department of Justice investigation they were worried would come down on them over covering this stuff up. So all of this is happening. That is still going on. And Michael Goodwin, our guest on this for the New York Post, to his credit, he predicted this stuff months ago. He said, what we're going to see is there's this lingering investigation. Things are quiet right now, but when the results from that investigation come back up, it's gonna turn into a scandal. Assuming that investigation bears fruit, it will be a major political scandal, and we'll start to hear about it a lot again. Now, he said that about the sexual harassment and assault claims, and he was right about that. And I want to talk to him again soon, but I'm pretty sure that he'll be right about it as it applies to the FBI's case, looking into the nursing home deaths too, because that's also a huge, big, lingering thread of this. And Cuomo, I'll put it like this: if the narrative right now is that Cuomo is kind of screwed, that narrative will be done and done and done again. It will be proven beyond a reasonable doubt that he's out, basically, with the FBI. Of course, unless he's impeached first, and we'll see how soon that happens. Nevertheless, we've got callers, and we're taking more. 202-521-1320. Austin, what's up?
Before we go to the callers, you were saying like we could talk about the Delta variant and COVID. I read this today. The city of Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
2.6 million population, I believe. They have 6 beds left in the ICU.
Oh my gosh, Jesus.
6. And then they're saying, and it went into stage 5 COVID lockdown.
Yeah.
Because of the huge uptick in cases.
See, I do the numbers every morning, and people give me crap for doing the numbers every day, because for a while there, the cases were in remission. You know, they're going back down. And so it's like, why are you still doing the numbers, Shane? Well, this is why. It's because we get back into it. Anyway.
Until there's no numbers to report on.
Until there are no numbers to report on, I suppose, or, you know, at least well into that process. But to my failure, pardon me, I don't tend to do the hospitalizations. I'll sometimes mention them if it's like a particularly steep count. But hospitalization, the number of people who are getting hospitalized for COVID, it's also really bad. It was like a 90+% increase over where we were 2 weeks ago. If you get a doubling every couple of weeks, you're going to be in a bad spot before too long. And that's crazy to hear. And this is, if you remember, well, I want to go to a caller. I want to go to Reef. 202-521-1320 is the phone number if you feel like joining. Reef, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Oh, thank you for taking my call. First of all, free drilling signs free. Gang, let your hands off Haiti. Yesterday I made it through George Galloway's show. Thank God I did. I told him, I said, you know, one day, you know, when Danielson win his case, hopefully he'll win his case, I can hire him as a lawyer, and he can look into my case, and we can go after Michael E. DeBakey, VA Medical Center, Houston, for contaminated water. And then after that, I can donate to the people in Flint to help them out.
I'm gonna take this.
They had the Status Quo with Jordan Chariton interviewed the ex-mayor of Flint. I'm trying to look for the article, right? They interviewed the ex-mayor
of Flint, Michigan. Jordan Chariton doing excellent work on this. We've had him on to talk about Flint specifically and the water crisis in Michigan generally, and Chicago, I believe, doing very good work there. Anyway, Tarif.
Yeah. So the former, okay, my name is Mayor Karen Weaver, ex-mayor, former, you know, and she accused the Michigan AG Nasser of helping Michigan Governor Rick Snyder to get away with murder. You know, so that's pretty big. You know, and I think she also blasted. She wanted, you know, she had nothing nice to say about Whitmer either. So his interview is on the Status Quo. She's sitting down talking to Jordan Sharon, and I'm gonna share that link to y'all with y'all, so y'all can take a look, and the viewers can take a look. You just go to Fort Lyons Radio underneath the link for today's show, and you take a look at it, and y'all see it. You know, once y'all post the link for today's show. So yeah, so it's a bombshell. You know, so
that sounds big. I'm looking into that, and thanks for the link, Tarif. We're understaffed. I haven't mentioned this. Jamarl Thomas, co-host of the show, out of the studio right now. Of course, he's feeling sick. He has a flu, and he's been out for a couple of days. He went out starting last Thursday. Also out today. We were thinking he might be coming back in. Simultaneously, Cordell Woodland, producer for the show today, also out sick with food poisoning. We think unrelated, but neither of them COVID from the symptoms. I don't believe Jamarl's going to get tested later. Anyway, we're short staffed right now. Slightly, it's just producer Austin, engineer Andre, and myself in the studio. Because of that, Tarif, I don't see the link on Twitter, but I'll be watching for that. And thank you for the heads up on that.
I shared it to y'all. Your inbox, your DM.
Oh, you sent it as a DM? Okay, I'm going to look into that.
Yeah.
Tarif.
Check it out. Yeah.
Thank you for the call. Appreciate it. Yeah, Tarif, thank you. Long-time caller in the show, one of our most consistent and longest-lasting callers, and very often calls in with good information, and is himself, from everything he's told us, acted as a whistleblower, has to do with his veterans hospital down in Houston, Texas, that had contaminated water, dirty water, basically. And he tried to blow the whistle on this and systematically got shut down. And will occasionally call in to talk to us about that. And also, often just has his finger on the pulse of very interesting stories and keeps up to date on them. In fact, late last week, I believe we're still trying to find somebody on this, in fact. Although we had a short conversation about it with Carl Jha, so that might have sufficed. But the liquid thorium molten salt nuclear power plants, Tarif, you called in with that late last week, and we followed up on that with Carl Jha. Very interesting conversation. It's just that kind of thing. Let's take us into a break, though. We're coming back in a minute with Michelle Witte. She's a host of Political Misfits, also airing on this network. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Again, quick heads up for our guest, Michelle Witte, as well as our audience. Hey, Michelle. Jamarl Thomas, normal host, co-host of the show, is out sick. We believe he has the flu or at least something like it. We don't think it's COVID.
Good.
He's getting tested today. But yeah, he's been out since last Thursday. And we're thinking he'd be coming back today, but it turns out probably tomorrow, Wednesday. Anyway, that's for the audience's sake mostly. Nevertheless, he is in our hearts and in our minds. He is with us here in spirit and joining us now in studio. I say us because he's with us here in spirit. Joining us now in studio, we have Michelle Witte.
That's me. Hello.
Sputnik News analyst and co-host/host of Political Misfits. That's a show airing here on Radio Sputnik every Monday through Friday from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern. Go check that out. They do a really good job, and it's a fun show.
Thanks.
Michelle.
Yeah.
We often get it. I've made it this way. We often get into these conversations about backpacking and like ultralight through hiking and this stuff. And we're gonna be talking about that again today. I'm really personally interested in it, and it's fun. But we also really should, and I feel remiss because we haven't recently, get you on to talk about politics and other general stuff.
We can do. But I talk about that on my show all the time. And Bob never wants to talk about backpacking, so I enjoy this.
Good.
I
Okay,
enjoy
good
this,
to hear.
even when the story is about how I got my behind absolutely handed to me.
Well, we can get into it. I just want to make sure I'm not trying to actively typecast you as the backpacker. On the
No,
network
thank
or
you. I
something like
appreciate that. I appreciate that.
But let's get into it.
I am the political backpacker.
Is that right? Well, Jamarl's the progressive soapbox. I was the progressive soapbox. You could be the political
backpacker.
You were telling me you went on the PCT and you brought a book by Max Blumenthal, right?
I did.
Yeah.
The Management of Savagery, and I really proselytized to people. So
that's what you can do.
Maybe that's what I've created a whole bunch of people who understand foreign policy a little bit better.
There's like an anti-imperialist commune of bears somewhere out there.
Somewhere. Yeah.
Like a cool place to live. I know plenty of squatters who have it's like their golden land. Anyway, I'm just kidding. Let's get into this conversation. New Hampshire. We were talking about backpacking.
Yeah. I'd never been to New Hampshire. It was beautiful. I mean, I got really good weather. It was gorgeous. I was going up to do what I planned on having as a 3-day hike in the White Mountains. I've never been to the White Mountains, and I was really looking for something. I was really looking for some some majesty, like some mountains that felt wild and felt challenging and that I could drive to, because it's hard to rent a car anywhere. You know what I mean? Like you can fly to Alaska, you can fly to Montana, but if you want to rent a car,
That's what I
it's
hear.
going to be another like $1,000.
Right now, it's
So-
crazy expensive. Kind of unrelated, but yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, well, I can drive to the Whites, and I've never been up there, and 3 days sounds good. That'll be great. And yeah, I did a day and a morning and had to bail off the trail because my knee was hurting really badly, but not before. I mean, it was cool. I had gone out kind of looking for a win. And so it was sort of an interesting personal journey. Like I was, having kind of a rough time, and I was like, let me take myself into the mountains. Like this is stuff that I do by myself all the time. This is going to like reset me, going to go and like conquer some things. And instead, again, I got another loss, but I don't know. I came out of it kind of feeling better. I mean, it was sort of emotional to bail off the trail, even though it's like a completely inconsequential, 3-day, 31, 32-mile hike. But there was something a little bit emotional about like just deciding not to finish it. But then also, man, sometimes you try and do something and you just can't. Like, listen, kids. Listen, kids, sometimes you just can't do the thing you set out to do. And it's better to bail out than to have to get rescued off these mountains all the time.
Yeah.
People go into the Whites really unprepared for the weather. They go in there really unprepared for the terrain. And so I didn't want to put myself in that situation. I had an opportunity to sort of bail out down a moderate 5-mile trail rather than, trudge another 5 or so miles and then have the opportunity to bail out down a 10-mile trail down a waterfall, basically.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, all right, I'm not getting helicoptered off these mountains. I'm going to walk myself out.
That can often end bad. Whether it's a dry creek bed or it's your surprise, not so dry creek bed.
Yeah.
That's the right call. And so wait, real quick, the White Mountains, you said you went up to New Hampshire. Those are like New Hampshire, Vermont. Are they in Vermont?
Yeah, I think they're all in New Hampshire. It's where the presidential range is. The Appalachian Trail goes through some of them.
Okay.
I have a lot of respect for AT hikers because that trail is a lot steeper and a lot rockier than the PCT.
Interesting.
So I mean, that's sort of like, yeah. And this is the thing that I learned. I mean, the Hemi Trail terrain is just like hand over hand climbing up boulders half the time. So there's a lot of real scrambling. The rock is all granite, so even if it's wet, your feet really stick to it. So your footing is actually really good. It's just that you are high stepping up and high stepping down like refrigerator-sized boulders half the time.
Yeah.
And it made me realize like if you're talking about gear, I think part of it, like maybe I could have done it on a day hike. Maybe I could have done it without like 25 pounds on my back, or maybe if I was going to go back, like it would actually become an ounce counter and saw the handle off my toothbrush. Cause I was like, whatever, 3 days, I don't have to carry that much food. I don't have to carry that much water. Like I'm not even going to pay attention to how heavy this pack is. And it wasn't, it was like normal heaviness. I didn't bring like tennis rackets and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I think that made some of the difference. I think,
It would, especially if you're having to do that kind of climbing, that kind of steep climbing. That does sound like it heads towards majestic though, if that's what you're looking for. If you're wanting to get some elevation, and that often involves that. The PCT, what I've heard is, that's actually surprising to me because I think of going on the PCT. I've never done these. I haven't done the PCT or the AT, but I think of like the Sierras and the High Sierra specifically, and you've done it. So you get up and you kind of, you stay up, but is it the elevation change, something like that?
The elevation change, but here's the thing. And I like, as someone who hiked the PCT, I'm never going to tell you that it's easy. It's not, but the PCT is mostly graded for livestock. So it is not, it has a lot of switchbacks. It's not quite as steep.
Yeah.
So look, and if you had told me this when I was in Washington, I would have punched you in the face if you had said like, oh, it's not that steep. It's graded for life. Because you are going up and down. The elevation gain is outrageous. You are constantly going up and down, but you are not as often just going straight up and then straight down. And that's what murders your knees.
You did a southbound? You did southbound. Thank you.
Yeah, so which means you do all of the hardest parts immediately.
First,
like
yeah.
the first 150 miles are probably the hardest of the whole trail. After that, the first 500 miles are probably the hardest of the whole trail. And so you just do
Yeah.
that. You're just in total shock.
Yeah.
So you get out of Washington and then you're a really good hiker.
And it sets you up for the rest of the hike as you keep heading south.
Sets you up for Oregon, then you get through Northern California, and then you're so bored and you hate your life.
because you hit the desert pretty much.
Yeah,
once you get there.
I got mentally tired. But
I hear, but we were also, I think, a couple of times back when we were talking about the Continental Divide Trail. That would be characteristic of the CDT, right? A lot of the sort of like Midwest, long desert, dry, but also under trafficked. It's not as much of a community around it, but also that means you're kind of a pioneer in some sense.
yeah, I mean, the CDT is a lot more popular now, but still like a lot more remote. Again, we were talking about bailout options, not as many, much longer hitches. It's like CDT only really, in Washington and in the Sierras, like it's long hitches to town.
Yeah.
Which, makes a difference, right? You spend a lot more time sitting on the side of the road trying to get to a gas station to buy more jerky.
Yeah.
I did stay in, I drove up to New Hampshire and I stayed one night in a hostel there that happened to be full of, it was day hikers, but there were a bunch of AT through hikers there who would come off, were taking a rest day, collecting some food, getting ready to go on. And that was it was nice to sort of be back into that little trail community. And see what, there was a guy there who just couldn't wait to be finished. And I was like, yeah, I remember that. I remember. And you were like, I don't care what's coming up next. I just want it to be over.
That sounds fun.
Yeah.
Okay. One last, not the last thing, but it's sort of a follow on from, and I suppose we'll close the conversation out. We've talked previously in your appearances on Fault Lines, talking backpacking. We've talked about the big three. We've talked about, that's the shelter, your sleep system, and your backpack. We've covered that major ground. I think we even got briefly into clothing too. I think we talked about that. We have not talked about food and drink, I don't believe.
Okay.
Start with drink. You got to have some sort of filtration system usually.
Yeah.
What were you using?
Just the Sawyer, just a manual or whatever, the physical, not a chemical filtration system.
Regular size Sawyer squeeze?
I had a regular size Sawyer squeeze and I used that all along the PCT. It was totally fine. And then when I went in April out to near the Great Smokies, it was broken. I don't know what happened to it. It just broke. It just turned into like a solid piece of rock.
Yeah.
So I got a Sawyer Mini for this trip and it worked great. It worked so well. I feel like maybe there was, because I wanted to have some kind of filtration system.
Yeah.
It like squirts through so fast, it made me wonder if there's something wrong with it. But it was great so far.
Yeah.
I used it for a day and a half. It's terrific.
I've tried both the Sawyer Squeeze Mini and the regular one. The Mini bailed on me kind of too quickly, but it was my brother and I going on all these trips, and we were too hard on it. I hope yours lasts longer. And I think that's user error.
Yeah.
I think we were
Usually.
abrasive with it. Let's say that.
Yeah.
And then the Mini worked decently well. We switched over to the Platypus a while back, which is like this big separate brand, completely separate manufacturer. It's like a gravity fed system.
Yeah.
And it's a bit heavier, but it's like the way I was looking at it was often you want to hike away from, or you want to camp away from water. And so, you want to be at least 300, 600 feet. And so I can fill up a big 4-liter bag full of water, that kind of thing, trudge it up and have all the water I need for the next day. You know what I mean? That was our thought process, and it's worked decently well.
Okay.
Yeah. How about food? What'd you do for food?
Food is interesting. Food is a challenge on the PCT for me because I don't eat meat, and not a challenge, but you can't necessarily count on finding a ton of gas station food that you're going to want to eat if you don't eat meat, right? And it's not as easy to get protein sometimes, and whatever else. So before I hiked the PCT, I spent about a month cooking and dehydrating food.
Oh, cool.
And it was great. And I would absolutely do that again for any long hike because it works really well. I did like chili. I made a bunch of curries. I did pasta, stir fries, like all kinds of stuff. I had a really basic dehydrator that I borrowed from a friend, and I cooked whole meals, dehydrated them, packaged them, and then because again the PCT is pretty remote, I mailed them in packages to myself at different spots along the trail. So for the first, for all of Washington and some of Oregon, which is where it's hardest to access food because you're not hitting that many towns, and the towns you're hitting are very small towns. It's like a crossroad. I ate really well, and it's really nice to have something to look forward to when you get that hiker hunger at the end of the day, to have to think like, I'm going to eat a green curry that tastes good, that I made myself.
Yeah, that makes sense. That would be the way I would do it if I were doing it the right way, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Just making the food beforehand, especially doing the airdrop, shipping it out to yourself. That sounds like that is 100% how to do it. How do you feel you did on timing it? Because that would be one of the difficult things, is going into the next cache, running out of food or having too much. The balance, you want to strike somewhere in the middle.
Yeah,
it's probably better to have too much than not enough. But
one of the things that I didn't know also when I first started, because again, I was a day hiker and I wasn't really a backpacker until I just did the PCT. I didn't realize how many snacks I was going to want. I had this idea that I was going to cook I was going to have 3 meals and I was going to cook them, which is ridiculous and was really dumb, right? You don't want to clean up that much. You really just want to cook at night. So I all of a sudden had to scramble and fill my, buy a bunch of Oreos, buy a bunch of peanut M&Ms, get a bunch of that stuff. Luckily there are hiker boxes and stuff along the way so people could trade. I realized within 2 days on the PCT that I never wanted to eat another nut in my life. And I had 50 pounds of nuts in all my bags. So I was swapping out nuts for candy. So yeah. And then, for me, ultimately, I could never have too much food, right? I mean, of course you end up wanting to carry too much. I don't know. You just sort of go by, you get a sense of what you're eating during the day and you just kind of go by that. I didn't try to restrict food at all, because honestly, sometimes that's your only pleasure in the day.
Yeah.
Sometimes is what you get to eat at night.
Yeah.
I also put on a lot of weight by the end of the trail, which I think for me was the healthy way to do it. I ended up losing it all, but it is an interesting phenomenon. You think you're going to get on one of these big trips and you're going to be skinny and haggard at the end of it, but that's really only if you start with some weight to lose.
Yeah.
I ended up putting on 30 pounds of muscle by the end of the trail. Couldn't put on any pants when I got home, so I wasn't missing any meals on trail. But that's what you need. You need that big engine to drive you.
It's true. Learned that the hard way the last time I went out with my brother. Previously we'd gone on decently short trips and we'd always be within sight of civilization, that kind of thing. Then we went on this deep one in Nebraska and Wyoming and South Dakota across state lines. It's deep in the middle of nowhere, no civilization. When we went through a little farm and saw somebody, we were like, "Hey, it's New York City. We're back in the Big Apple again." But we went out and we brought candy. We had enough calories, but we did not have nearly enough protein.
Yeah.
And so I eat meat. I brought some little tuna packet things that it was just going to be for me, because my brother was turning his nose up at them. And then he came to be existentially reliant on the 70 grams of protein or whatever.
Yeah.
It wasn't enough even, but
bars are good. Those, get one of those builders, weightlifter bar things that has 20 grams of protein in it or whatever. Yeah, you need protein. You need to be able to feel full. Otherwise you just eat.
Totally.
18 pounds of peanut M&Ms in a day, and it's not satisfying.
I'm sorry to hear you bailed out on the New Hampshire trip, but there's this one that I do with my brother, and we have not completed it. We've tried 3 times the Morgantown loop. Again, we bike mostly. This is a bike packing loop, but we have gotten 60% of the way through 3 times over the course of the last couple of years. And we were gonna get it, but we haven't done it. You have any plans to go back out sometime?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to go back to New Hampshire. It was absolutely beautiful, and it's a pretty pleasant drive up. Yeah, I might actually try. I mean, I don't know. I'm sort of thinking I don't know. I don't think that I injured myself. It could just be that I can't do this terrain with weight, and so what I might try and do is do the rest of those loops as big day hikes. Because I think it would have made a big difference to not be carrying a pack. And I don't know, saying that is feels maybe not like a failure, but yeah, I mean, the thing is, I go into every hike really thinking this is definitely not the last good time I want to have.
Yeah.
And I don't want to, I knew people, there's a vein of hiker culture that really, the sort of embrace the suffer vein. And you need to do that, right? You do need to embrace the suffering. You do need to embrace the sort of type 2 fun. But when it gets into sort of celebrating walking through pain and relying on, vitamin I, right? Taking ibuprofen several times a day. I knew a girl who walked herself into a stress fracture of her femur. That's the biggest bone in your body. You know what I mean? If you were ignoring that kind of pain for so long, you're doing something wrong. And that was never something I wanted to do. So call it an abundance of caution, but I just
dropping
don't.
the weight too. But that would. It sounds like your big takeaway here is dropping the weight.
Yeah.
It's like,
but I don't know if I could drop it. I don't know if it's like going from light to ultralight is going to make a difference. It might just have to be like without a pack, or who knows? Maybe I'll turn into one of those insane like my poncho is my tent people.
I'm almost that far.
No.
I've considered it so many times. I've never. Well, no, not never. It's been a couple of years since I've rocked a tent. My brother and I just do tarps and bivvies and stuff. And what helped us, what really got me in the mindset. And it is ridiculous from the outside, I'll admit it, but once you're inside the mindset, it's like, this is the way to be, is competing with my brother. We have this spreadsheet. I've talked about this before. We're constantly like trying to edge each other out or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm winning. My tarp is lighter than yours.
Yeah.
That kind of thing where it's like all Dyneema tarps and super lightweight line and just stakes. And I went down to the 8-ounce inflatable torso length X-Lite pad.
Yeah.
And I love that thing because it's like technically an upgrade from what I had before. If you get in that mindset, maybe you can get there, but to each their own.
Or I'll just be, I'm a pretty fast day hiker. I can do,
exactly.
I could do 20 miles as a day hike. That's fine.
Exactly. Yeah. Especially us, like all up and downhill like that. That sounds crazy. We've got to close this out. Michelle Whitty, thank you for joining me.
You're welcome.
Fun
Thanks
talking.
for listening to my tale of woe.
I'm sorry to hear it went that way.
It was still a great time. That's the thing. Still a great time.
These things so often are like that. Even those quote unquote failures, you usually get out there, you see beautiful sights, you feel good a lot of the time, hopefully.
Met some really nice people.
That's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Michelle Whitty, thank you for joining.
You're very welcome.
Michelle Whitty joining me now. She is a Sputnik News analyst and co-host of Political Misfits. That's a show airing here on Radio Sputnik every Monday through Friday from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern. Go check that out. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, coming back taking your calls, 202-521-1320. Be right back on the other side of this short break. Thank you.
Fault Lines.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Pelly for now. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Again, that's 202-521-1320. Phone lines are now open. We're taking your calls, all calls, talking about a lot today. So again, the big news today, at least for a person of a certain mind, is that the Olympics happened. We won. The United States resoundingly won in both of the main categories. And, well...
Not so resounding in gold, but...
Well, it's still, you know...
A win's a win.
A win's a win. A win in both categories, especially because it's like... I will come back to the thing. It's like you're drafting them. It's like in a race, you know, biking or driving, whatever. You're drafting your opponent. You know, you stay right behind them. Just a couple medals behind them, a couple golds behind them. And then right at the end, you strike, you pounce. You use the last ounces of energy available to you and you win.
Like we're playing with our food.
Is that right?
Yeah.
You're reserving the like little bits of like sweet mashed potatoes or sweet.
Well, everyone wants to see like a competition, so we're like, okay, we'll let you take the lead a little bit.
Oh,
swoop in for the lead.
I see what you're saying. Yes, yeah, exactly.
There was another piece of Olympic news that Glenn Anderson's going to be really upset about this. I'm sure you guys talked about race walking.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, it's out of the Olympics now.
Really?
This was the last year.
Really?
Because in a push for wokeness, the progressives have canceled race walking because there's no male and female division. There's no separate race walking. It's just the race walk with men and women.
Uh-huh.
And they decided that male anatomy has a inherent benefit or has an inherent advantage over women.
I need to pause.
On the length of their legs and their muscle structure and everything.
I'm going to need a couple centuries to work this out. Austin, hold on a second. You're telling me they're saying that there are fundamental differences between men and women.
I know, shocking, right?
That hang on a second. The contradictions are obvious. The contradictions are palpable, are they not? 202-521-1320.
To be clear, it's the IOC that stated that there was an advantage over of men and women, not like the progressive left.
Yes.
And the progressive left said, well, if we can't if women don't have a fair shot at winning, then get rid of it. And instead of create a women's division of race walking,
that would be the thing
IOC
to do, right?
just said,
but why not? Isn't that kind of privileged?
Well, I mean, it's also probably like a dying sport.
But how old
Not that
is
many
it?
viewers?
Is it? How old is
That's a Google question.
Yeah, no, that's and especially you really got yourself Glenn Austin Anderson. He's your former professor, and you just said it's a dying sport. He's a race walker. You've just landed yourself in hot fire.
He's a previous race walker.
He's a previous race walker. Oh, would he agree with you? Do you think?
That's a good question. I know that he would say it's a fringe sport.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever watched. I've never heard of it until talking with him.
I thought it was new.
And
We didn't
never
get
watched
into.
it.
We talked with him very, very briefly as we were closing out with him last time we had him on. It was just me. I think it was last Thursday, something like that, maybe Friday. Anyway, we're talking with him briefly. I thought race walking was new.
I'm not entirely sure about that. And even if it was, that is so not uncommon for the Olympics. The amount of failed new sports, so I think that actually rock climbing and skateboarding were both fairly well received this year. If they weren't, then they would have said, okay, well, we tried it. No more.
The last time.
Yeah.
Do you know how they judge what kinds of qualities a sport would have to have? Because I'm just mainly Jamarl's not here, and so I feel the need to root for chess. Since he's not in, I'm like, can chess possibly made as an Olympic sport?
I hope not. Because by the strict definition of it, it is not a sport, and Jamal's going to fight me on this. He's listening to the show at home.
I think he might have been out the day that we actually got into an honest to God argument about it on air. You know chess boxing?
No.
Oh, you don't know chess boxing?
No.
Oh, I was going to make a joke about that, but no, a bad joke. But no, we almost got into like a chess boxing match over that. It's where you like alternate playing chess and boxing. And if you think about combining chess and boxing, you can start to imagine why it's a pretty interesting sport. You know what I mean?
That makes zero sense.
Traumatic brain injuries from boxing.
You mean I mean, that's just like
Exactly.
if you take old NFL players and you put them playing chess, and that's pretty.
That's
pretty
human
gruesome.
misery. Yeah, you can do some clinical studies on the degeneration of the human brain in real time, just looking at chess boxing matches. But no, I'm kidding. It's just interesting that, I don't know, race walking feels a little bit, for some reason, even though I made fun of it and would still make fun of it, now it has underdog status, and so we shouldn't make fun of it. But also, it feels a little bit more legit than either skateboarding or rock climbing.
Why?
I don't know. Maybe
I mean,
because
it's just-
it was an Olympic sport.
Well, now they all are.
It's true, I know.
I mean, any
But it has
sport,
tradition in its back.
almost any sport can get its chance at Olympics.
Even chess?
I mean, yeah, it can, but it's not a sport. Like from actual dictionary definition, it's not a sport. I'm not saying it's not skilled. But yeah, and actually one surprising thing, cricket has never been in the Olympics.
Oh, really?
I feel like that should
that feels,
100% be in the Olympics.
That feels way more prestigious.
Yeah. And then to your question about what is the parameters of taking out a sport, most of the time it's been Winter Olympics, and because of far too many injuries. Like they tried to do, I believe they have speed skating, but they tried to do slalom Olympics,
the death slalom.
Slalom speed skiing.
Yeah.
And they were going at 80 miles an hour, and one wipeout was just detrimental, blowout knees and everything. And they were like, no, we have to take this out.
Yeah.
So there's that. There's also viewership. Is it popular? And then there's also can countries even field a team? Because if multiple countries genuinely do not have an interest in this, then it's
probably not of international significance, or at least
if
not of
5
enough
countries
to
are competing
justify
against each other, then it's not really
exactly
Olympics for the world. And then it's just excluding someone out of a gold medal because the nation doesn't take an interest in it or can't field a team.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting. No, so that makes sense. Just to balance a different interests, almost completely unrelated, except for sports. Do you ever watch bicycling? My brother and I are pretty into cycling around together.
I watch some of the stuff when it's on the Olympics. I don't watch it normally.
Yeah. There was this Tour de France crash a little while back that was just insane. Somebody was holding out a sign, and lead person on the right hits the sign, and then it's like dominoes, except the dominoes are bikes. It's 40 people, 50 people, just a wake of carnage, which, from the calculus, that's pretty darn dangerous. A lot of people went head first into each other. It's like a legitimate pile up of bodies.
I think I saw that crash.
It was a big crash.
It's kind of funny.
It kind of like it is kind of the sadistic part of human behavior. Yeah, we managed to like these things, but no, it was kind of funny. No, my brother brought that up, and I was like, wait, when was this? And he's just like, it had just happened in the previous days. But a big deal, and the kind of thing that, again, it's not as dangerous as football maybe in terms of TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, but that happens sometimes. And some of the videos of people cycling downhill specifically, like there's this community of people on YouTube who like record themselves going down hills 50, 60, 70 miles per hour, sometimes that fast. It's just insane. No protection. Anyway, we've got to close it out here. Talking about, subjects nearer and dearer to my heart with Jamarl gone, I'm sad to say. Oh, looking forward to having him back, though. Talking more newsy stuff again soon. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Jamarl Thomas out today, hopefully back tomorrow or at least soon. See you again 7 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning, folks. Signing off Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. See you on the other side.